Welcome to Buddha Bedtime Stories. There is nothing you need to do. No goals, no tasks, just a quiet space to be. Tonight's stories are old companions, gentle Buddhist and Zen teachings shared by firelight, beneath trees, or in the hush of early morning. Now they've found their way to you. But before we begin, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? I invite you to share that, if you'd like. It reminds us that even in stillness, we're not alone. Let these teachings find their way gently into your heart. You don't need to analyze or remember, just receive. Like moonlight on water, take one slow breath in. And as you breathe out, let the stories begin to flow. Here is the first one. No one admired the pond. Visitors admired the mountains. They admired the waterfalls. They admired the ancient temple that stood on the hillside overlooking the valley. But the pond received little attention. It sat beyond the temple gardens, hidden behind a grove of willow trees. The water appeared dark, still, murky. Thick mud covered the bottom. In summer, insects hovered above its surface. In autumn, fallen leaves collected along its edges. To most people, it looked unimpressive. Some even considered it ugly. The monks rarely disagreed. They simply smiled, because they knew something the visitors did not. Every spring, the pond transformed. From the dark water emerged lotus flowers, pure white, soft pink, brilliant and beautiful. Their petals seemed untouched by the mud below. Visitors often gathered to admire them. Many wondered how something so beautiful could emerge from such murky water. The monks understood. That was precisely the lesson. Among the novices living at the temple was a young monk named Kenta. Kenta had not always imagined becoming a monk. As a child, he dreamed of many things: traveling, studying, building a successful life, perhaps even becoming a famous scholar. Then life changed. His father died unexpectedly. His family's financial situation collapsed. Several relatives argued bitterly over inheritance. Friends drifted away. The future he imagined disappeared. By the age of 19, Kenta felt broken, lost, directionless. The monastery offered refuge, food, shelter, silence. Most importantly, distance from the chaos he carried inside. Yet even after entering monastic life, peace did not arrive. His body sat in the temple. His mind remained trapped in the past. Every day, he compared his life to the life he believed he should have lived. Every day, he replayed disappointments. Every day, he asked the same question: why did this happen to me? Other novices seemed happier, more stable, more focused. Kenta felt damaged. One spring morning, after a particularly difficult meditation session, he walked alone through the temple grounds. The sky was grey. Rain threatened. His thoughts felt heavy. Eventually, he found himself standing beside the pond. The water looked especially dark that morning. Mud churned near the surface after several days of rain. The sight matched his mood perfectly. Ugly, he muttered. An elderly monk standing nearby heard him. His name was Master Jen, the oldest monk in the monastery. He smiled. The pond? Kenta nodded. Look at it. The old monk stepped closer. What do you see? Mud. What else? Dirty water. The old monk nodded, then pointed toward a single lotus bud emerging from the surface. What about that? Kenta glanced at it. The flower had not yet opened. It isn't blooming yet. Master Jen smiled. Neither are you. The young monk frowned. The answer irritated him. He had come seeking understanding, not riddles. The old monk seemed unconcerned. He simply walked away. leaving Kenta alone with the pond. Over the following weeks, spring deepened. The lotus bud slowly opened. Then another, then another. Soon, dozens of flowers covered parts of the pond. Visitors arrived to admire them. Many took long walks just to see the blossoms. Kenta found himself returning frequently, not because he loved flowers, because he couldn't stop thinking about the old monk's words. Neither are you. One afternoon, while helping in the garden, he finally asked Master Jen directly, "What did you mean?" The old monk continued trimming a shrub. "The lotus. What about it?" "It grows from mud." Kenta nodded. "I know." The monk smiled. "Most people stop there." The young novice waited. The old monk continued. "The flower does not grow despite the mud. It grows because of it." Silence followed. Kenta frowned. The statement felt important, yet he didn't fully understand it. That evening, he sat beside the pond long after sunset. The lotus flowers rested silently upon the water. He thought about his life, his father's death, the financial struggles, the loneliness, the disappointments, all the experiences he wished had never happened. Mud, years of mud. The realization felt uncomfortable, because if Master Jen was correct, perhaps he had been viewing his life incorrectly. Several days later, another lesson arrived. A wealthy merchant visited the monastery. The man possessed everything Kenta once desired: fine clothing, influence, money, status. The novice found himself immediately jealous. For several days he observed the visitor. Then something surprising happened. The merchant requested a private conversation with the abbot. Afterward, rumors spread. The man was deeply unhappy. His marriage was failing. His children barely spoke to him. He suffered from constant anxiety. The wealth that appeared so attractive from a distance had not protected him from suffering. The realization unsettled Kenta. Pain, it seemed, visited everyone. Different forms, different circumstances, the same human experience. Several weeks later, Master Jen assigned him an unusual task. Each morning, Kenta was instructed to care for the lotus pond, removing debris, monitoring water levels, protecting the flowers from damage. At first, he considered the work boring. Then something changed. Day after day, he observed the flowers closely. He noticed how slowly they grew, how they pushed upward through murky water, how storms bent them without destroying them, how some blooms opened beautifully while others struggled. The pond became a teacher. One morning, he discovered a lotus flower damaged by insects. Several petals were torn. The blossom would never look perfect. His first instinct was disappointment. Then he paused. Despite the damage, the flower remained beautiful, not because it was flawless, because it was alive. The insight lingered. Months passed. Summer arrived. Kenta continued practicing, meditating, working, studying. Yet something subtle had shifted. His relationship with suffering began changing. He stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" Instead, he began asking, "What is this teaching me?" The difference was profound. One question led to resentment. The other led to curiosity. Life did not become easier, but it became more meaningful. Several years later, a severe drought struck the region. The temple suffered along with everyone else. Water became scarce. Gardens withered, crops struggled. Even the lotus pond shrank noticeably. Many monks worried. Some feared the flowers would disappear entirely. Yet when the following spring arrived, something remarkable happened. The lotus blossoms returned, fewer than before, but stronger. Their roots had survived beneath the surface. waiting, patiently. Kenta stood beside the pond watching them emerge. Suddenly, he understood something he had been slowly learning for years. Resilience is often invisible. People assume strength looks dramatic, powerful, obvious. But real resilience often looks quiet. Roots surviving winter, seeds waiting beneath soil, a lotus growing through mud. Years continued passing. Kenta eventually became a teacher. Students frequently sought his guidance, especially those experiencing difficulties. One young novice arrived after losing both parents within a short period. The grief overwhelmed him. Life felt unfair, meaningless, broken. Kenta listened carefully, then led the novice to the pond. By now, it was famous throughout the region. Hundreds of lotus flowers bloomed each spring. They stood quietly beside the water. After several minutes, the novice asked, "Why did you bring me here?" Kenta pointed toward a flower. "What do you see?" "A lotus." "What else?" The young man shrugged. "Nothing." Kenta smiled. "Most people see a flower." He pointed toward the dark water. "I see the mud too." The novice remained silent. The teacher continued. "The flower is beautiful. The mud is not. Yet they belong to the same story." The young man stared at the pond. Something softened in his expression. Not healing, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of healing. Years later, Kenta himself grew old. His hair turned grey, his movements slowed. The pond remained. Each spring, lotus flowers continued blooming. Generation after generation, student after student, lesson after lesson. One evening, while sitting beside the water at sunset, a visitor asked him, "What is the greatest lesson the lotus teaches?" Kenta reflected carefully, then answered, "That suffering is not always an obstacle." The visitor looked surprised. "What do you mean?" The old monk smiled. "Many people spend their lives wishing the mud had never existed." He looked across the pond. "But without the mud, there is no lotus." The wind moved gently across the water. The flowers swayed slightly. The visitor remained thoughtful. And perhaps that is the lesson. Most people want growth without difficulty, wisdom without confusion, strength without struggle, compassion without heartbreak, patience without waiting. Yet life rarely works that way. The experiences we resist often become the very conditions that help us grow. Loss can deepen empathy. Failure can create humility. Loneliness can reveal connection. Hardship can uncover resilience. This does not mean suffering is good, nor does it mean we should seek it. The mud is still mud. Pain is still pain. Grief is still grief. But the lotus reminds us of something hopeful. We are not defined solely by what happens to us. We are also shaped by how we grow through it. The Buddha himself taught that awakening often begins by facing suffering honestly, not avoiding it, not denying it, not pretending it isn't there. The lotus never escapes the mud. It grows through it, and perhaps we can too. So when life feels difficult, remember the pond. Remember the dark water, remember the unseen roots beneath the surface, and remember the flower. Because some of the most beautiful qualities a human being can develop are not born from comfort. They are born from adversity met with wisdom. Just as the lotus rises from the mud without being stained by it, we too can emerge from life's difficulties carrying compassion, understanding, and strength, not despite the mud, but because we learned how to grow through it. The village of Nandara sat between a dense forest and a wide river. The people there lived simple lives. They farmed, fished, raised families, shared stories beside evening fires. Most days passed peacefully, yet like all villages, Nandara carried its share of fears. Fear of drought, fear of illness, fear of loss, fear of the unknown. The villagers rarely spoke about fear directly. Instead, they spoke about dangers, threats, possibilities, warnings. But beneath many conversations, fear quietly shaped the way people saw the world. Among the villagers lived a young man named Toma. Toma was intelligent, hard-working, and cautious, very cautious. Some people called him wise, others called him anxious. The difference was often difficult to see. Toma believed caution kept him safe, so he questioned everything, double-checked everything, prepared for every possibility. He imagined dangers before they arrived. He planned responses before they were needed. The habit helped him sometimes, but it also exhausted him. His mind rarely rested. Every shadow contained risk. Every uncertainty contained threat. Every unfamiliar situation demanded suspicion. Though he appeared calm on the outside, his thoughts often raced beneath the surface. One evening, after visiting a neighboring village, Toma began walking home through the forest path. The route was familiar. He had traveled it many times. The sun had already disappeared. Twilight filled the trees. Long shadows stretched across the ground. Birdsong faded. The forest grew quiet. Toma quickened his pace. Not because he feared the forest. At least, that is what he told himself. The path curved around a large boulder, then continued downhill toward the village. As he rounded the bend, something caught his eye. A snake, large, dark, coiled directly across the path. Toma froze. His heart slammed against his chest. His breathing stopped. The world narrowed instantly. Snake, danger, run. Every instinct activated. The creature appeared enormous, its body thick, its shape unmistakable. Toma stepped backward carefully. Then another step. His pulse hammered. The forest suddenly felt hostile. Every sound seemed threatening. The fading light made everything worse. He stared at the snake. The snake remained motionless. Minutes passed. The creature did not move. Neither did Toma. Fear held them both in place. Eventually, the young man abandoned the path entirely. He turned around, took a much longer route home. By the time he reached the village, darkness had fully arrived. His family immediately noticed something was wrong. What happened? Toma described the encounter. The enormous snake, the dangerous location, the narrow escape. The story spread quickly. By morning, everyone knew. Several villagers decided to avoid the path entirely. Others carried sticks for protection. Parents warned children. Fear multiplied, not because anyone had seen the snake themselves, because someone else had. The following afternoon, an elderly monk named Genkai arrived in the village. He often traveled between monasteries, offering teachings wherever people invited him. The villagers welcomed him warmly. During dinner, someone mentioned the snake. Several people described its size. Others added details. The story grew slightly with each retelling. Genkai listened quietly, then asked, "Has anyone seen it today?" Silence. The villagers exchanged glances. Finally, someone answered, "No." The monk nodded. Interesting. The next morning, Genkai walked toward the forest path. Several villagers tried to stop him. The snake might still be there. The route was dangerous. The monk smiled, then continued anyway. Curiosity eventually persuaded Toma to accompany him. The young man remained nervous throughout the journey. His eyes constantly scanned the undergrowth. Every rustling leaf captured his attention. The memory of the previous evening remained vivid. Eventually, they reached the bend in the path. Toma stopped immediately. There, he pointed. The snake remained exactly where he remembered it. Dark, coiled, dangerous. The monk looked carefully, then calmly walked forward. Toma nearly shouted. "Stop!" Genkai continued. The young man watched in horror. The monk reached the snake, bent down, then lifted it from the ground. Toma stared, speechless. The snake dangled harmlessly from the monk's hands. Because it was not a snake, it was a rope. Old, weathered, darkened by rain and dirt, but undeniably a rope. The realization struck like lightning. Toma stood frozen. His fear had felt completely real. His racing heart, his panic, his certainty, all real. Yet the snake never existed. Only the rope existed. The monk smiled gently. "What frightened you?" Toma swallowed hard. "The rope." Genkai shook his head. "No." The young man frowned. "What do you mean?" The monk laid the rope beside the path. The rope caused confusion. He looked kindly at Toma. "Your mind created the snake." The words lingered long after they returned to the village. For several days, Toma could think of little else. His fear had been genuine, yet its object had been imaginary. How many other fears operated the same way? The question unsettled him, because he suspected the answer might be uncomfortable. Weeks later, another incident occurred. A merchant failed to arrive when expected. Toma immediately imagined problems, accidents, robbery, disaster. The familiar cycle began. Then he remembered the rope. He paused, took a breath, and waited. The merchant arrived the next morning, delayed by rain, nothing more. Again, the mind had created a snake. Months passed, the lesson deepened. One day, a friend failed to return a greeting. Toma instantly assumed offense. Perhaps the friendship had changed. Perhaps resentment existed. Perhaps something was wrong. Then he remembered the rope. The following day, he discovered the friend simply hadn't heard him. Another snake vanished. The pattern appeared everywhere. A strange pain became a serious illness. Until it wasn't. A delayed letter became terrible news. Until it wasn't. An uncertain future became certain catastrophe. Until it wasn't. Again and again, the mind filled gaps with fear. The rope became a snake. One winter evening, Toma visited Genkai. The monk sat beside a fire drinking tea. "I keep finding ropes." The old monk laughed. "Good." The young man smiled. "I didn't realize how many snakes I carried." The monk nodded. "Most people don't." Silence settled between them. The fire crackled softly. Finally, Toma asked, "Why does the mind do this?" Genkai looked thoughtfully into the flames. "Because uncertainty is uncomfortable," the monk continued. "When information is incomplete, the mind often invents a story." Toma nodded. "And fear writes very convincing stories." The old monk smiled. "Exactly." Years passed. The teaching transformed Toma's life. Not because fear disappeared. Fear remained. Fear still served important purposes. Real dangers existed. Real problems occurred. Real suffering happened. The lesson was not that fear is always wrong. The lesson was to investigate before believing it completely. One spring, a severe drought threatened the region. Many villagers panicked immediately. Predictions spread. Rumors multiplied. Disaster seemed inevitable. Toma listened carefully, then remembered the rope. The drought was real. But many conclusions surrounding it were assumptions. No one knew the future. Preparations were wise. Panic was not. The distinction helped many people remain calm. Years later, Toma became known as a wise advisor. Young people often sought his guidance. One afternoon, a frightened student arrived. "I think everything is going wrong." The young man described work problems, relationship concerns, financial worries, health fears, an endless collection of anxieties. Toma listened patiently, then asked, "Which of these are happening right now?" The student paused. Several concerns were real. Many were possibilities. Others were pure imagination. The realization slowly appeared. The old teacher smiled, then shared the story of the rope. The student laughed, then grew thoughtful, then quiet, because everyone eventually discovers their own ropes. Late in life, Toma returned to the forest path. The trees had grown taller. The village had changed. Many people from the original story were gone. The path remained. The bend remained. The memory remained. He stood where he once froze in terror. The place looked ordinary, peaceful, almost beautiful. The irony made him smile. For a while he simply listened. Wind moving through leaves, birds calling in the distance, water flowing somewhere beyond the trees. Then he remembered something important. The fear had been real. The snake had not. That distinction mattered. Many people dismiss fear entirely after discovering an illusion. The Buddha's teaching was more subtle. The suffering was real. The experience was real. The misunderstanding was real. Only the snake was false. And perhaps that is the lesson. Much of human suffering arises not from reality itself, but from mistaken perception. We imagine rejection where none exists, failure where none exists, danger where none exists. We create stories, then react to those stories as though they are facts. The rope becomes a snake, the shadow becomes a threat, the uncertainty becomes a catastrophe. Wisdom does not require eliminating fear. Wisdom requires seeing clearly, looking again, investigating, questioning assumptions. The Buddha often taught that clear seeing dissolves many forms of suffering naturally, not through force, not through denial, through understanding. The rope remains a rope, the snake disappears, and with it, much unnecessary fear. So the next time anxiety appears, pause. Look carefully. Ask yourself, what do I actually know? What am I assuming? What is the rope? What is the snake? Because sometimes the thing that frightens us most exists only in the darkness of misunderstanding. And a little light changes everything. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. The sea had fed the village for generations. Every morning before sunrise, while the sky was still dark blue and the stars had not yet faded, the fishermen of Minato carried their nets to the shore. They pushed their boats into the water. They listened to the waves. They checked the wind. Then, one by one, they rowed out into the open sea. Some days, the sea was generous. The boats returned low in the water, heavy with fish. Children ran along the shore laughing. Women prepared baskets. Merchants counted coins. Families ate well. Other days, the sea gave very little. A few small fish, a torn net, an aching back, a long silence. But the villagers understood something important. The sea could be worked with. It could be respected, it could be learned from, but it could never be owned. Among the fishermen lived a man named Daisuke. When Daisuke was young, he was known for his bright spirit. He was not the richest fisherman. He did not own the largest boat. His nets were patched in several places. His house was small, yet he seemed deeply happy. If he returned with 10 fish, he smiled. If he returned with 3, he smiled. If a storm forced him to stay home, he helped repair boats or drank tea with the elders near the harbour. People liked being around him. His laughter came easily. His gratitude was natural. Every evening, he ate with his wife, Hana, and their young daughter, Emmy, in a small house near the water. Their meals were simple: rice, fish, vegetables, tea, sometimes fruit if the market had been kind. Before eating, Daisuke always looked at the table and said, "Enough." Hana would smile. Emmy would repeat the word proudly, "Enough." And for many years, it truly was. Then, slowly, comparison entered his life. It did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like a small leak in a boat, quiet, easy to ignore, dangerous over time. One fisherman bought a larger boat. Another built a bigger house. A third began selling fish to merchants in the city and returned wearing finer clothes. At first, Daisuke felt happy for them, then curious, then restless. One evening, after passing a neighbor's newly built home, he looked at his own small house differently. The walls seemed thinner than before. The roof seemed older. The table seemed poorer. Nothing had changed, except his seeing. That night, when Hana placed dinner before him, she waited for the familiar word, "Enough." But Daisuke said nothing. He only looked down at the meal. Hana noticed. "What is it?" He shook his head. "Nothing." But it was not nothing. A new thought had entered him. Maybe this is not enough. From that day forward, the thought grew. When his catch was small, he felt ashamed. When his catch was large, he wondered why it was not larger. When neighbors succeeded, their happiness felt like an accusation. When others praised his work, he barely heard them. He began rising earlier, returning later, repairing nets late into the night. Hana admired his effort at first, then worried. "You work as though something is chasing you," she said one evening. Daisuke laughed. "I am only trying to improve our life. Our life is not bad." I did not say it was, but his voice was sharp, sharper than he intended. Hana said nothing more. Outside, the waves moved gently against the shore. Inside, something less gentle had begun moving through his heart. One morning, rumors spread through the village. A golden fish had been seen beyond the western reef. Not golden in the way ordinary fish flash beneath sunlight. Truly golden. Its scales shone like coins. Its fins moved like silk. An old fisherman claimed he had seen it leap from the water at dawn, glowing brighter than the sunrise. Another said it was no ordinary fish, but a blessing from the sea. A merchant claimed that nobles in the city would pay a fortune for such a creature. By sunset, the entire village was talking. Some laughed, some doubted, some dreamed. Daisuke listened silently, but inside him, something awakened. A golden fish, one catch, one miracle, one moment that could change everything. That night, he could not sleep. He imagined the fish in his net. He imagined merchants gathering around him. He imagined coins spilling across his table. A larger boat, a larger house, finer clothing for Hana, a better future for Emmy, respect, security, admiration, more. The word glowed inside him. More. The next morning, he rowed toward the western reef. He told Hana he was simply trying a new fishing area, but he knew the truth. He was searching. For hours he watched the water. Every flash beneath the surface made his heart leap. Every wave became a possibility. Every shadow seemed promising. But the golden fish did not appear. He returned with only 4 ordinary fish, a catch he once would have accepted with gratitude. Now it felt like failure. Days passed, then weeks. Daisuke searched constantly. He ignored familiar fishing grounds. He stopped listening to older fishermen who knew the currents. He neglected ordinary catches because ordinary fish no longer interested him. His income declined. His patience declined faster. Hana tried to speak with him. Daisuke, we have less food than before. I know. You are chasing a rumor. I am chasing an opportunity. At what cost? He turned away. That question angered him because he did not want to answer it. At the harbor, an elderly fisherman named Hiro watched him carefully. Hiro had fished the sea for more than 50 years. His boat was small, his hands rough, his face deeply lined from sun and salt, but his eyes were peaceful. One evening, Hiro found Daisuke repairing a net with unnecessary force. You are angry at the net, the old man said. Daisuke looked up. The net keeps tearing. Perhaps it is tired of chasing dreams. Daisuke frowned. I do not need riddles. Hiro sat beside him anyway. For a while, neither spoke. Then the old fisherman asked, What are you truly trying to catch? The golden fish. Hiro nodded. And after that? Daisuke paused. What do you mean? If you catch it, what then? I sell it. And then? I buy a better boat. And then? A better house. And then? Daisuke grew irritated. Then life is better. Hiro looked toward the sea. For how long? The question lingered. Daisuke hated it, so he returned to his net. The old fisherman stood. Before leaving, he said, A hungry heart can swallow the whole sea and still call itself empty. Daisuke pretended not to hear, but he heard. The following month, the obsession deepened. Daisuke dreamed of the golden fish almost every night. Sometimes he caught it. Sometimes it slipped away. Sometimes it spoke with a human voice and said, Not yet. He woke exhausted. During the day, he became distracted. He missed small joys. Emmy showing him a shell she found. Hana preparing his favorite soup. The moon rising silver over the harbor. Everything ordinary became background. The golden fish became foreground. One afternoon, after returning with an empty net, he saw Hiro sitting calmly beside his boat. The old man's net was empty too. Daisuke laughed bitterly. Bad day. Hiro looked at the empty net. Only if I expected the sea to obey me. That does not bother you. Sometimes. Then why do you look peaceful? Hiro smiled. Because an empty net is not an empty life. The answer annoyed Daisuke. He walked away. But later that night, while lying awake, he remembered it. An empty net is not an empty life. He looked toward his sleeping wife, then toward the small room where Emmy rested. For one brief moment, he almost understood. Then the image of the golden fish returned, and the understanding disappeared. One morning, after a night of heavy rain, Daisuke rowed farther than ever before. The sky was grey, the water dark, mist hovered above the sea. Other fishermen stayed closer to shore. Not Daisuke. He rowed beyond the western reef, beyond the familiar currents, beyond caution. Hours passed. The sea was strangely still. Then he saw it, a flash, gold beneath the water. His breath stopped. There it was. The golden fish moved below his boat like a living flame. Its scales shimmered even beneath the cloudy sky. Daisuke's hands trembled. Everything he had imagined seemed suddenly possible. He cast his net. The fish darted away. He pulled the net back, cast it again, missed, again. The fish circled, always just beyond reach. The chase consumed him completely. He no longer noticed the sky darkening, no longer noticed the wind changing, no longer noticed how far he had drifted. There was only the fish, gold, promise, future, more. At last, The net tightened. Daisuke cried out. He pulled with all his strength. The weight was enormous. The boat rocked. Rain began falling. He pulled harder. For one wild moment, he believed he had done it. The golden fish was his. The future was his. Happiness was his. Then the net tore. The weight vanished. Daisuke fell backward into the boat. The sea foamed around him. The golden flash disappeared beneath the waves. Gone. A storm arrived quickly. Too quickly. Waves rose. Wind struck the boat. Rain blinded him. For the first time that day, fear replaced desire. He grabbed the oars and tried to turn back, but he had drifted far. Too far. The sea he had ignored now demanded his attention. For hours, he fought to return. By the time he reached the harbour, night had fallen. Hana stood on the shore with several villagers. Her face was pale with fear. Emi clung to her robe. When Daisuke stepped from the boat, soaked and shaking, Hana ran to him. For a moment, he expected anger. Instead, she embraced him. "You came back," she whispered. Something broke inside him. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. Because for one moment he saw clearly. He had almost traded this embrace for a fish. That night, he sat awake beside the cold hearth. His body ached. His hands were cut from the ropes. His net was ruined. His catch was gone. The golden fish was gone. But the worst part was not the loss. It was the realization. He had been losing long before the storm. Losing meals, losing laughter, losing peace, losing the ability to say enough. The next morning, he carried his torn net to Hiro. The old fisherman was sitting beside the harbour, as if waiting. Daisuke placed the net down. "I saw it," Hiro nodded. "The golden fish?" "Yes. And? I almost caught it." The old man looked at him carefully. "Almost?" Daisuke lowered his head. "It tore the net." Hiro said nothing. Daisuke continued. "I thought catching it would make my life full." His voice grew quieter, but chasing it made everything empty. The old fisherman's face softened. For a long time, they listened to the waves. Then Hiro said, "The fish was never the problem." Daisuke nodded slowly. "My wanting was." "Not wanting," Hiro corrected gently. "Craving." Daisuke looked at him. Hiro continued. "Wanting can guide a life. Craving consumes it." The words entered him deeply. The old man picked up the torn net. Contentment does not mean refusing to fish. It means knowing the value of what is already in the boat. Daisuke covered his face with his hands. For the first time in many months, he wept. Not for the golden fish, for himself, for the man he had become, for the simple joy he had abandoned. The healing did not happen immediately. Deep habits rarely disappear in one day. For weeks, Daisuke still looked toward the western reef. Part of him wondered if the fish would appear again. Part of him wanted to search. But each time the craving rose, he practiced pausing. He looked at the boat beneath him, the net in his hands, the morning sky, the water, his breath. "Enough," he whispered. At first, the word felt forced, then familiar, then true. One evening, after returning with a modest catch, he placed dinner on the table. Rice, vegetables, fish, tea, nothing extraordinary. Hana watched him carefully. Emi looked at the food. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Daisuke smiled softly and said, "Enough." Hana's eyes filled with tears. Emi repeated the word, "Enough." And this time, Daisuke felt it. Years passed. The story of the golden fish continued spreading through the village. Some claimed it was real, others called it imagination. Daisuke never argued either way. He knew what he had seen, but he also knew the fish itself mattered less than what it revealed. From time to time, younger fishermen asked him about it. One ambitious young man once said, "If I saw it, I would catch it." Daisuke smiled. "Perhaps. You would not try again?" The older fisherman looked toward the sea, then answered, "I still fish." "But not for that?" Daisuke paused. "I fish for what the sea gives." The young man frowned. "That sounds small." Daisuke laughed gently. "It only sounds small to a hungry mind." Late in life, Daisuke often sat beside Hiro's old place near the harbor. Hiro had passed away years before, but his words remained like stones worn smooth by waves. An empty net is not an empty life. A hungry heart can swallow the whole sea and still call itself empty. Wanting can guide a life. Craving consumes it. Daisuke understood them now, not as clever sayings, as lived truth. One sunset, Emi, now grown, sat beside him. She had a child of her own. The little boy played with shells near the water. Emi looked at her father. "Do you regret chasing it?" Daisuke watched the sea. For a long time he said nothing. Then he answered, "Yes." She waited. "And no." Emi smiled slightly. "That sounds like something old Hiro would say." Daisuke laughed. "Perhaps he finally taught me." He looked toward the horizon. "I regret the pain I caused, the time I lost, the way I forgot what mattered." He paused. "But if I had never chased the golden fish, perhaps I would never have seen the emptiness in my own heart." The waves moved gently against the shore, so even that became a teacher. As darkness settled, the sea reflected the first stars. The boy ran toward them, holding a small shell. "Grandfather, look!" Daisuke took it carefully. It was ordinary, brown and white, chipped along one edge, the kind of shell he had ignored thousands of times. But this time he looked closely. Its spiral, its smoothness, its quiet beauty. He smiled. Beautiful. The child beamed. And in that simple moment, Daisuke felt richer than he ever had while dreaming of gold. And perhaps that is the lesson. Greed rarely begins as greed. It begins as comparison, as restlessness, as the thought that what we have is not enough because someone else appears to have more. Then craving enters. It promises happiness later, after the next catch, after the next purchase, after the next achievement, after the golden fish. But the promise keeps moving. The Buddha taught that craving is one of the roots of suffering. Not because desire itself is evil. Desire can help us grow, learn, build, and care. But craving is different. Craving says, "This moment is worthless unless it gives me what I want. This life is incomplete unless I possess what I lack. This ordinary blessing does not matter because something greater might be out there. And so the net may be full, yet the heart feels empty." Contentment is not laziness. It is not giving up. It is not refusing improvement. Contentment is the ability to see clearly what is already here: the meal, the home, the breath, the people who love us, the ordinary catch, the morning sea. Enough. A person may still fish, still work, still dream, still grow, but without letting craving devour the present. The golden fish may exist, or it may not, but either way, a life spent chasing it can become poorer than a life lived gratefully with ordinary fish. So when your mind says more, pause. Look into your net. Look around your table. Look at the people beside you. Ask gently, is my life truly empty? Or have I simply forgotten how to see what is already here? For sometimes the greatest treasure is not the golden fish we finally catch. It is the quiet freedom of no longer needing it to feel whole. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. Far beyond the great rivers and trade roads, hidden between steep mountains, stood a small village known as Echo Valley. The village itself was ordinary. Simple wooden homes, terraced fields, a winding stream, a stone bridge crossing the water. Nothing about it seemed unusual, yet travelers remembered it long after they left, not because of the scenery, because of the echoes. The mountains surrounding the valley created a strange phenomenon. Every sound returned, not once, many times. A shout could bounce between cliffs for nearly a minute. Laughter traveled across hills. Songs lingered in the air long after they ended. Children loved the echoes. Visitors found them amusing. The villagers grew accustomed to them. Most barely noticed anymore, except for an old teacher named Jinen. He often told the children, "The mountains are trying to teach you something." The children usually laughed. "What are they teaching?" Jinen would smile. "Listen carefully." The answer never satisfied them, but he never offered another. Among the children growing up in the village was a boy named Riku, bright, energetic, restless, always moving, always talking, always looking for excitement. Riku possessed many good qualities: generosity, courage, curiosity. Yet he also had a habit that created problems. He acted before thinking. Words escaped his mouth before wisdom caught them. Actions happened before consequences entered his mind. The pattern caused trouble constantly. One day, he mocked another child. The words spread quickly. Friendships suffered. Another day, he broke a tool while showing off. Someone else had to repair it. Another day, he lied to avoid punishment. The lie created even larger problems. Again and again, the same cycle repeated. Action first, consequences later. The distance between the two prevented learning, at least for a while. One afternoon, Riku wandered into the hills with several friends. The children climbed rocks, explored caves, played games. Eventually, they reached a cliff overlooking the valley. The location was famous for its echoes. Anything shouted from that spot returned louder than expected. One of the boys cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hello!" the mountains answered. "Hello! Hello! Hello!" The children laughed. Another shouted, "Good morning!" The greeting returned repeatedly. "Good morning, good morning, good morning." Then Riku had an idea, a mischievous one. He shouted an insult, a cruel insult directed toward another child in the village. The words bounced across the mountains, returning again and again and again. The children laughed, except one, a quiet girl named Hana. She frowned. That wasn't nice. Riku shrugged. It was only a joke. The answer ended the conversation, but not the lesson. The following morning, trouble appeared. The insult had traveled farther than expected. Several people heard it, including the child it targeted. Feelings were hurt. Arguments followed. Parents became involved. What began as a moment of amusement created several days of conflict. Riku felt frustrated. It was only words. His mother looked at him carefully. Words are never only words. The answer annoyed him, mostly because he didn't understand it. Several weeks later, the harvest season began. Everyone in the village helped. Children carried baskets. Adults worked the fields. The entire community participated. One afternoon, while gathering vegetables, Riku grew bored. Very bored. The work felt repetitive, slow, uninteresting. While no one watched, he began cutting corners, skipping tasks, leaving small sections unfinished. After all, who would notice? The missing work seemed insignificant. One small area, then another, then another. At sunset, he returned home satisfied. He had finished early, avoided effort, and escaped consequences. Or so he thought. Several days later, problems emerged. The unfinished sections attracted pests. The pests spread. Damage increased. Extra labor became necessary. The entire village spent time fixing problems that never needed to exist. Again, a small action produced larger consequences. Again, Riku failed to connect the two, at least initially. One evening, after hearing about the situation, old Jinen approached him. The teacher carried a walking stick carved from mountain cedar. His hair was white, his movements slow, yet his eyes remained remarkably alert. The old man sat beside the boy. For a while, neither spoke. Then Jinen asked, "Have you ever noticed how echoes work?" Riku groaned. "Everyone knows how echoes work." The teacher smiled. "Do they?" The boy rolled his eyes. "You make a sound. It comes back." The old man nodded. A useful observation. Then he asked, "What happens if you shout kindness?" The answer seemed obvious. Kindness comes back. "What happens if you shout anger?" Anger comes back. The teacher smiled. Interesting. The conversation ended, at least externally. The lesson had only begun. Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered the valley. The fields rested beneath white blankets. Life slowed. One afternoon, a fierce storm trapped several travelers near the village. The weather became dangerous. Visibility disappeared. Temperatures dropped. The villagers organized help immediately. Food, shelter, blankets. Everyone contributed, including Riku. At first, he participated reluctantly. Then something unexpected happened. One of the travelers recognized him. Several years earlier, Riku's family had helped the man's family during a difficult time. The traveler remembered. Clearly, deeply. He spoke about it with gratitude. The boy listened carefully. The event happened years ago, yet its effects continued. Like an echo, the realization struck him. Good actions return too, not always immediately, not always predictably, but they returned. The lesson deepened over the following months. Riku began noticing patterns. A kind word often led to another. Patience created trust. Trust created friendship. Friendship created support. Small actions rippled outward, farther than expected. The same proved true of negative actions. A careless comment created resentment. Resentment created distance. Distance created misunderstanding. The chain continued. The world suddenly appeared more connected than before, like a pond disturbed by a single stone. One spring morning, Jinen invited him on a walk. They followed a mountain trail overlooking the valley. Birds sang. Wildflowers bloomed. The air felt fresh. Eventually, they reached the famous Echo Cliff, the same location where Riku once shouted insults. The teacher stopped, then handed him a small stone. "What should I do with it?" The old man pointed toward a still pond below. Riku dropped the stone. Ripples spread outward, circle after circle, touching the entire surface. The teacher smiled. "Did the stone intend that?" The boy shook his head. "No. Yet it happened." The old man nodded, then pointed toward the mountains. "Now shout something." Riku thought carefully, then cupped his hands. "Thank you." The mountains answered, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." The echoes drifted across the valley. The teacher smiled. Life works similarly. The lesson finally landed, not intellectually, directly, deeply, completely. The years passed. Riku grew older, wiser, not perfect. No one is, yet more aware. Before speaking, he paused more often. Before acting, he considered consequences, not because he feared punishment, because he understood connection. Every action entered the world, then continued traveling, sometimes visibly, sometimes invisibly, but rarely ending where it began. One summer, a younger child approached him. The boy looked upset. A friend had betrayed him. An argument had occurred. Harsh words had been exchanged. The situation felt hopeless. Riku listened carefully, then told him about echoes. The child looked confused, just as he once had. Riku smiled. Understanding arrives when it is ready. Years later, after becoming one of the village leaders, Riku helped resolve disputes regularly. Whenever conflicts emerged, he noticed something interesting. Most problems began long before people realized. A careless word, a neglected kindness, an unexamined action. The visible conflict represented only the final echo. The original sound happened much earlier. The insight made him patient and compassionate, because everyone created echoes. Everyone. The wise simply learned to listen for them sooner. Late in life, Riku often visited the cliff overlooking the valley. The mountains remained unchanged. The echoes remained strong. One evening, while watching the sunset, he remembered the boy he once was. Impulsive, careless. Certain consequences belonged to someone else. The memory made him smile, then laugh softly. The mountains answered, laugh softly, laugh softly, laugh softly. The sound drifted across the valley, gentle, warm, kind, a fitting echo. And perhaps that is the lesson. The Buddha taught karma not as punishment or reward, not as cosmic bookkeeping, but as cause and effect. Actions create consequences. Intentions shape outcomes. The Village of Echoes reminds us that life continuously reflects what we send into it. Words matter. Actions matter. Choices matter. Because nothing exists in isolation. Every act becomes a cause. Every cause becomes a condition. Every condition influences what follows. Like an echo moving through mountains, like ripples spreading across water. The effects often travel farther than expected, longer than expected, sometimes returning years later. This truth can feel intimidating, but it is also hopeful, because kindness echoes too, generosity echoes too, patience echoes too, compassion echoes too. The smallest action may influence lives we never meet. The smallest kindness may continue long after we forget it. So before shouting into the valley of life, pause. Consider what you wish to hear returning. For sooner or later, the mountains answer, and the echoes always come home. Far beyond the great rivers and fertile valleys, hidden among mist-covered mountains, there stood an ancient monastery few people knew existed. The path leading there was narrow and winding. Travelers who attempted the journey often turned back long before reaching the summit. The climb was steep. The weather changed without warning. Fog frequently covered the mountainsides, hiding the trail from view. Yet those who persevered eventually discovered something remarkable. The monastery seemed to emerge directly from the clouds. Its wooden halls rested upon stone foundations carved centuries earlier. Prayer flags fluttered gently in the mountain wind. Pine trees surrounded the buildings like silent guardians. The entire place felt timeless, as though the world below belonged to another age. Among the monks who lived there was a young novice named Kaito. Unlike many of the others, Kaito had not arrived seeking enlightenment. He had arrived seeking escape. Years earlier, his family had been respected merchants in a prosperous town. But fortunes change. Business declined, debts accumulated, arguments grew frequent. By the time Kaito reached adulthood, the home he once loved felt filled with disappointment and regret. Everywhere he looked, he saw failure. His father's bitterness, his mother's exhaustion, his own growing frustration. Eventually he left, partly to find peace, partly to find answers, partly because he no longer knew who he was. The monastery welcomed him kindly. Life there was simple. Wake before dawn, meditate, work, eat, study, sleep, repeat. At first, Kaito found comfort in the routine. The silence soothed him. The mountain air felt clean. The distance from his former life brought relief. Yet after several months, something unexpected happened. The peace he sought did not fully arrive. The noise outside had disappeared, but the noise inside remained. Old memories continued visiting him. Regrets resurfaced. Embarrassing moments replayed endlessly in his mind. Arguments from years earlier still triggered anger. Failures still triggered shame. Sometimes during meditation, he felt more disturbed than before. One evening, after a particularly difficult meditation session, he approached the monastery's elder teacher. The monk was known simply as Master Haku. He was old enough that nobody remembered exactly when he had arrived. Some said he had lived at the monastery for 50 years. Others claimed even longer. Nobody knew for certain. What everyone agreed upon was this. Master Haku possessed an unusual calmness. Nothing seemed capable of disturbing him. Not storms, not criticism, not praise, not success, not failure. His presence felt like a still lake, untouched by wind. Kaito bowed respectfully. "Master, may I ask a question?" "Of course." The young monk hesitated. Then the words came rushing out. "I thought coming here would bring peace." Haku nodded. "But my mind remains restless." The old monk listened. "I still feel anger. I still feel fear. I still feel sadness. I still feel regret." Kaito lowered his eyes. "Sometimes I wonder whether I'm simply incapable of finding peace." For several moments, Haku said nothing. Then he stood. "Come." They walked through the monastery grounds. The evening sun was beginning to disappear behind the mountains. Long shadows stretched across the stone pathways. The air smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Eventually, they arrived at a small storage building seldom visited by anyone. The structure was old, very old. Dust covered the windows. Spiderwebs occupied the corners. The wooden door creaked loudly when opened. Inside, forgotten objects filled the room. Broken lanterns, old tools, discarded furniture, boxes whose contents nobody seemed to remember. Haku led Kaito toward the back of the building. There, leaning against a wall, stood a large mirror. At least, it appeared to be a mirror. It was difficult to tell. The surface was covered with years of dust. Thick layers obscured nearly everything. Kaito could barely see his reflection. The old monk pointed toward it. "What do you see?" "A dirty mirror." Haku nodded. Then he handed Kaito a cloth. "Clean it." The task seemed strange, yet Kaito obeyed. He began wiping away the dust. Slowly, patiently. The first few strokes changed almost nothing. The dust was stubborn. Years of neglect had accumulated. But gradually, the surface beneath began to emerge. Small patches reflected light. Tiny sections revealed fragments of his face. Kaito continued working, minute after minute. Dust filled the air around him. His arms grew tired. Still he continued. As more of the mirror appeared, something remarkable happened. The reflection became clearer, not because the mirror itself had changed, but because what covered it was being removed. Eventually, The entire surface shone. For the first time, Kaito could see himself clearly. The mirror reflected everything perfectly. The room, the light, the old monk standing nearby. Even the smallest details appeared effortlessly. Haku smiled. Now tell me, what do you see? A mirror. Is it different from before? Kaito considered the question. Not really. The mirror was always there. The old monk nodded. Exactly. The two sat quietly beside the mirror. The evening light continued fading. The room grew softer and darker. Finally, Haku spoke. Most people spend their lives believing they are the dust. Kaito listened carefully. They identify with every fear, every regret, every painful memory, every passing thought. The old monk gently touched the edge of the mirror. But those things are not what you truly are. The words lingered in the silence. Kaito felt something stir within him, yet he was not entirely sure he understood. The old monk continued. The mind naturally produces thoughts. It produces fears. It produces desires. It produces stories. That is its nature. He looked toward the mirror, but awareness itself remains untouched. Kaito frowned slightly. Like the mirror? Exactly. The old monk smiled. The mirror reflects storms, but it is not the storm. It reflects sunlight, but it is not the sunlight. It reflects faces, but it is not the faces. The room became quiet again. Outside, the wind moved gently through the pines. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang softly. For the first time, Kaito sensed what the old monk was pointing toward. Not an idea, not a theory, something deeper, something difficult to describe. That night, during meditation, Kaito tried an experiment. Instead of fighting his thoughts, he simply observed them. A memory appeared. He watched it. A fear appeared. He watched it. An irritation appeared. He watched it. Each thought arrived. Each thought remained briefly. Each thought departed, like clouds drifting across the sky. For the first time, he noticed that the observer remained unchanged. The thoughts moved. Awareness remained. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Kaito continued practicing. Some days were peaceful, others were difficult. Yet slowly he began noticing something he had overlooked for years. The mind was constantly changing. One moment happy, the next moment sad. One moment confident, the next moment uncertain. One moment calm, the next moment restless. Everything flowed. Everything shifted. Everything moved. Yet beneath the movement existed something still, something quietly aware of it all, like the mirror beneath the dust. One winter morning, a fierce snowstorm struck the mountains. The monastery disappeared beneath thick blankets of white. Wind howled through the valleys. Snow accumulated on rooftops and pathways. Many younger monks complained about the weather. Some worried about supplies. Others worried about the cold. Kaito found himself smiling. Not because the storm was pleasant, but because he suddenly remembered the mirror. The storm existed, yet awareness of the storm remained untouched. The thoughts existed, yet awareness of the thoughts remained untouched. The insight felt simple, yet profound. Years later, Kaito himself became a teacher. Students often came seeking answers. Some complained about anxiety. Others struggled with grief. Others felt trapped by endless thinking. Rather than immediately offering advice, Kaito frequently brought them to the old storage building. The mirror remained there, still shining, still reflecting, still teaching. One afternoon, a young novice stood before it and asked, "Master, when will I finally stop having negative thoughts?" Kaito smiled. Perhaps never. The novice looked disappointed. But then, how can I be at peace? Kaito pointed toward the mirror. Does the mirror demand only beautiful reflections? The young monk stared silently. It reflects whatever appears, without resistance, without attachment, without judgment. The novice slowly began to understand, not completely, but enough. Years continued passing. The seasons came and went. Snow melted. Flowers bloomed. Leaves fell. Storms arrived. Storms departed. The mirror remained. One evening, as an old man, Kaito sat alone beside it. The room was quiet. Golden sunset light filled the space. He looked into the reflection. Wrinkles lined his face now. His hair had turned silver. His body had changed. His life had changed. Everything had changed. Everything except the awareness that had witnessed it all. The same awareness that had observed childhood, youth, adulthood, joy, loss, success, failure. The same silent presence that had always been there beneath the dust. Kaito smiled softly. Then he closed his eyes. Outside, the mountains rested peacefully beneath the evening sky. Inside, the mirror reflected the fading light. And in that quiet moment, the lesson appeared once more. You are not every thought that passes through your mind. You are not every fear that visits your heart. You are not every mistake from your past. You are not every story you tell yourself. Those things come and go, like weather, like seasons, like dust carried by the wind. Beneath them remains something deeper, something still, something clear. The dust may gather, life may become confusing, the mirror may seem hidden, but it is never lost. It simply waits, patiently, quietly, until one day, with enough awareness, enough honesty, and enough compassion, we begin wiping away the dust and discover that what we were searching for was there all along. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. Long ago, in a quiet valley surrounded by blue mountains and slow-moving clouds, there was a village built along an old pilgrimage road. The road had existed for generations. It wound through forests, crossed narrow bridges, past rice fields, and climbed toward a distant monastery high in the hills. Every year, travelers walked this road seeking blessings, wisdom, healing, or simply silence. Some carried offerings, some carried questions, some carried grief they could not name. Among the villagers lived a young man named Narlin. Narlin was known as dependable. He helped his neighbors repair roofs. He carried water for the elderly. He worked hard in the fields. He rarely complained aloud. Because of this, many people believed he was peaceful. But inside, Narlin was not peaceful. For many years, he had carried a quiet bitterness. It began with small disappointments, a harsh word from his father, a friend who betrayed him, a dream that never came true, a love that ended without explanation. None of these things had destroyed him. At least, that is what he told himself. He continued working. He continued smiling. He continued doing what was expected. But something inside him had changed. He became easily irritated. Small mistakes angered him. Other people's happiness made him feel strangely resentful. When someone spoke kindly to him, he suspected hidden motives. When someone criticized him, even gently, the words stayed in his mind for days. Yet if anyone asked what troubled him, he always answered, "Nothing." One spring morning, the village prepared for the annual pilgrimage to the mountain monastery. Dozens of villagers would walk the old road together. They would spend 3 days traveling through forests and hills before reaching the temple. There, they would light lamps, offer flowers, and listen to teachings from the monks. Nalin joined them, not because he felt especially devoted, but because he hoped the journey might quiet his restless heart. At dawn, the group gathered near the village gate. The air was cool. Mist rested on the fields. Birds called softly from the trees. The pilgrims carried simple bags of food and water. Among them walked an elderly monk named Venerable Sander, who had come down from the monastery to guide the group. He was small, thin, and very old. His steps were slow but steady. His face carried the calmness of someone who had made peace with many seasons. Before they began, Venerable Sander looked at the group and said, "Walk gently." The villagers bowed. Then the journey began. At first, the road was easy. The sun rose slowly over the fields. Children laughed. Travelers spoke cheerfully. The morning light touched everything with gold. But after several hours, the path became rougher. Stones appeared beneath the dust. The ground rose gradually toward the hills. The pilgrims grew quieter. Nalin walked near the middle of the group. At some point, he felt a small discomfort in his right shoe. At first, he ignored it. It was nothing, just a tiny pressure beneath his foot. He continued walking. A little later, the pressure became sharper. Something was inside his shoe. A pebble, perhaps. Small. Annoying. He considered stopping to remove it, but the group was moving steadily, and he did not want to fall behind. So he kept walking, step after step. The stone pressed into his foot. At first it was merely irritating, then painful. Nalin's mood darkened. The cheerful voices around him began to annoy him. The sunlight seemed too bright. The road seemed too long. When a child accidentally bumped into him, he snapped, "Watch where you're going." The child stepped back, startled. Nalin immediately felt ashamed. But instead of apologizing, he blamed the road. He blamed the heat. He blamed the child. He blamed everything except the stone in his shoe. By midday, they stopped near a stream to rest. The pilgrims removed their bags and drank cool water. Some washed their faces. Others shared rice cakes and fruit. Nalin sat apart from the group. His foot throbbed. Venerable Sander approached quietly. "You seem troubled," the monk said. Nalin forced a smile. "I am fine." The monk looked at him gently. "Are you?" "Yes." Sander nodded, but did not leave. After a moment he asked, "Does your foot hurt?" Nalin looked surprised. "A little." "Then perhaps you should examine your shoe." "It is nothing." The old monk sat beside him. Small things are not always nothing. Nalin felt irritation rise. Why was the monk paying attention to such a minor matter? There were surely deeper teachings to discuss. Impermanence, compassion, awakening, not shoes, not pebbles. "I can continue," Nalin said. The monk nodded. "Of course." Then he added softly, "Many people continue." The words stayed with Nalin as they resumed walking. The path became steeper. The forest thickened. Birdsong echoed through the trees. Yet Nalin heard little of it. All his attention had narrowed to the pain in his foot. Step, pain, step, pain, step, pain. By late afternoon, he was angry with everyone. When the group slowed down, he resented them. When they walked faster, he resented them. When someone sang softly to encourage the others, he found the song unbearable. The world had not changed very much, but his suffering had colored everything. That evening, the pilgrims reached a small shelter beside the road. They would sleep there before continuing in the morning. As the others prepared food and bedding, Nalin finally sat down and removed his shoe. A tiny stone fell into his palm. It was no larger than a bean. He stared at it, so small, so ordinary, so harmless looking, yet it had turned the entire day bitter. Venerable Sander sat nearby, warming his hands around a cup of tea. Nalin held up the stone. This caused all that pain. The old monk smiled faintly. Yes, it is so small. Yes. Nalin looked embarrassed. I should have removed it earlier. The monk nodded. Yes. For a while, neither spoke. Night settled around the shelter. The forest darkened. A small fire crackled gently. Finally, Sander said, "The body teaches quickly what the heart often teaches slowly." Nalin looked at him. "What do you mean?" The monk pointed to the stone. "When a stone enters the shoe, every step becomes painful." Nalin nodded. "When resentment enters the heart, every experience becomes painful." The words struck him unexpectedly. The monk continued. "At first it may seem small. A memory, a disappointment, a wound, a sentence someone spoke years ago. But if it remains unexamined, it begins to affect everything." Nalin looked down. The old monk's voice remained gentle. "You may think you are angry at the road, angry at the weather, angry at the people walking beside you. But sometimes the pain is coming from something you carry." Nalin said nothing, because he knew. Deep inside, he knew. The stone in his shoe had lasted only one day, but the stones in his heart had been there for years. That night, while the other pilgrims slept, Nalin remained awake. The forest was quiet. Moonlight entered through gaps in the wooden shelter. He thought about his father, his friend's betrayal, the dream he had abandoned, the love he had lost. Each memory was like a small stone. None seemed large enough to explain the heaviness of his life. Yet together, carried step after step, year after year, they had changed how he walked through the world. In the morning, the pilgrimage continued. This time Nalin walked more carefully. His foot felt tender, but lighter. The path climbed higher into the hills. Mist drifted between the trees. The air grew cooler. At midday, the group reached a ridge overlooking the valley below. The village looked tiny from such a height. Fields became patches of green and gold. Rivers became silver threads. Nalin stood quietly beside Venerable Sander. After a long silence, he said, "Master, how does one remove a stone from the heart?" The old monk looked toward the valley. "First, one must admit it is there." Nalin breathed slowly. "And then?" "Then one must stop pretending the pain comes from everywhere else." The answer was simple. Too simple, perhaps. Yet Nalin felt its weight. For the rest of the day, he observed his thoughts. Whenever irritation appeared, he asked, "What stone is this touching?" When envy appeared, he asked, "What wound is this protecting?" When anger appeared, he asked, "What pain is asking to be seen?" At first, the questions made him uncomfortable. He preferred blaming the world. It felt easier, cleaner, safer. But slowly, something began to open. By the third day, the pilgrims reached the mountain monastery. It stood among pine trees and drifting clouds. Bells rang softly in the wind. Prayer flags moved above the courtyard. The travelers bowed at the gate. Some cried quietly, some smiled, some simply stood in silence. That evening, after the lamps were lit, Venerable Sander gave a teaching in the meditation hall. The pilgrims sat on woven mats. The hall smelled of incense and old wood. The monk placed a small stone before him. Nalin recognized it immediately. the stone from his shoe. Sanda looked at the gathered villagers and said, "Today I will speak about hidden suffering." Everyone listened. Most people notice great suffering easily. Illness, loss, disaster, death. These things are visible, but much of human suffering is carried in smaller ways. He touched the stone, a sharp word remembered for 10 years, a mistake never forgiven, a comparison repeated daily, a grief never spoken, a fear never examined, a resentment protected as if it were treasure. The hall remained still. These things may seem small, but when carried long enough, they shape the way we walk. They shape the way we speak. They shape the way we love. They shape the way we see the world. Nalin felt tears rise, though he did not know exactly why. The monk continued. The Buddha taught that suffering has causes. This is not meant to blame us. It is meant to free us. If suffering has causes, then suffering can be understood. If suffering can be understood, it can be released. He lifted the stone. But we cannot release what we refuse to notice. Those words entered Nalin deeply. After the teaching, many pilgrims returned to their sleeping quarters. Nalin remained in the hall. The lamps flickered softly. Venerable Sanda approached. "You heard the teaching?" "Yes." "And?" Nalin hesitated. Then he whispered, "I have many stones." The monk nodded. "Most people do. I don't know how to remove them." "One at a time." Nalin looked at him. "Just like walking." Sanda smiled. "Just like walking." The following morning before sunrise, Nalin went alone to the monastery garden. Dew covered the grass. The sky was pale blue. He sat beside a small pond and closed his eyes. One memory arose first. His father standing in the doorway years earlier saying, "You will never amount to much if you keep dreaming." The words had been spoken in anger, perhaps without thought, but Nalin had carried them like a stone ever since. He saw how they had shaped him, how they made him defensive, how they made every criticism feel like proof, how they made success feel urgent and failure unbearable. For the first time, he did not push the memory away. He breathed with it. He let himself feel the hurt beneath the anger. The hurt was younger than he expected, softer, almost childlike. Then he whispered, "This is a stone." He did not forgive completely in that moment. He did not become suddenly free, but he saw it clearly, and seeing clearly was the beginning. Over the following days, Nalin stayed at the monastery longer than the others. He asked permission to remain for a season. The monks agreed. His work was simple: sweeping paths, carrying water, helping in the kitchen, sitting in meditation. Each day he practiced noticing irritation before it became speech, noticing sadness before it became bitterness, noticing fear before it became blame. Some days he failed. Some days he spoke sharply. Some days old resentment returned with force. But now he had a practice. When suffering appeared, he looked for the stone. One afternoon, several months later, a young novice accidentally spilled a bucket of water across the kitchen floor. Nalin's first impulse was anger. The old habit rose quickly. Careless, foolish, always making more work. But before the words left his mouth, he felt the familiar sharpness inside. He paused. He breathed. Then he saw it. The stone was not the spilled water. The stone was his old fear of wasted effort, his old belief that mistakes made a person worthless. So instead of scolding the novice, he picked up a cloth. "Come," he said gently. "We will clean it together." The novice looked relieved, and Nalin felt something loosen inside him. Not dramatically, not completely, but truly. By winter, he returned to his village. The road down the mountain was the same road he had climbed months earlier. The stones were still there. The dust was still there. The bends in the path remained unchanged. But Nalin walked differently. He no longer expected the world to become smooth before he could be peaceful. He simply paid attention to what he carried. When he returned home, people noticed something had changed. He listened more, reacted less, smiled without forcing it. One day, he visited his father. The old man had grown weaker. His hands trembled slightly. For years, Nalin had avoided speaking honestly with him, but now he sat beside him in the courtyard. For a long time, they watched the sunlight move across the ground. Finally, Nalin said, "Father, when I was young, you said something that hurt me." His father's face tightened. Nalin continued, carefully and softly, "I carried it for many years." The old man lowered his eyes. "What did I say?" Nalin told him. Silence followed, a painful silence. Then his father covered his face with one hand. "I was afraid," he whispered. Nalin looked at him. "Afraid?" "I saw how hard the world could be. I thought if I made you tougher, you would survive." His voice shook. "But I think I only made you feel alone." Nalin felt years of anger tremble inside him. It did not disappear all at once, but something changed. The stone shifted. For the first time, he saw not only the wound his father had caused, but the fear beneath it. A wounded man had wounded his son, not because it was right, but because suffering, when unseen, travels from person to person. Nalin breathed deeply. Then he said, "I am trying to put it down." His father wept quietly. So did Nalin. Spring returned, then summer. Years passed. Nalin eventually became known in the village not merely as dependable, but as wise. When people came to him angry at others, he often listened quietly. Then he would ask, "What is the stone in your shoe?" At first they would blame someone, a spouse, a neighbor, a child, a business partner. Nalin would nod, then ask again, "And what is the stone in your shoe?" Some became annoyed, some left, some returned later. Those who understood began to heal. One evening, a young woman came to him after a quarrel with her sister. "My sister is selfish," she said. "Perhaps," Nalin replied. "She never listens." "Perhaps." "She thinks only of herself." "Perhaps." The young woman frowned. "Why do you keep saying perhaps?" Nalin smiled gently. "Because we are speaking about her shoes." She fell silent. Then he asked, "What is in yours?" Tears filled her eyes. After a long pause, she whispered, "I am afraid she no longer needs me." There it was, the stone. Not anger, fear, not accusation, pain. Once seen, it could be held differently. Late in life, Nalin returned once more to the mountain monastery. Venerable Sanda was very old now. His body had grown frail, but his eyes remained clear. The two sat together beneath the pine trees. Nalin removed a small object from his pouch. It was the same tiny stone from long ago. He had kept it all these years. Sanda smiled when he saw it. "You still carry it?" Nalin laughed softly. "Yes." "Then have you learned nothing?" The old monk's eyes twinkled. Nalin smiled. "I carry this one so I remember to put down the others." Sanda laughed, a warm, quiet laugh. The wind moved gently through the trees. For a long time they sat without speaking. Finally, Nalin said, "Master, do the stones ever completely disappear?" Sanda looked toward the mountain path. "Some do. Some become smaller. Some remain, but no longer wound us." He paused. The point is not to have walked a painless road. The point is to stop adding unnecessary pain to every step. Nalin bowed his head. He understood. Life would always contain difficult paths, sharp stones, uneven ground, unexpected burdens. But not every pain needed to become bitterness. Not every wound needed to become identity. Not every memory needed to remain lodged in the heart forever. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Nalin walked slowly along the monastery path. He felt the earth beneath his feet, cool, solid, real. Each step was simple, each step complete, and perhaps that was the lesson. Sometimes the thing making life painful is not the whole road. It is one small stone we have never stopped to remove. A resentment, a fear, a memory, a story, a grief, a wound we keep walking on. We may blame the road. We may blame the weather. We may blame everyone walking beside us. But healing begins when we finally pause, sit down, and look honestly at what we are carrying. The stone may be small, but if carried long enough, it can change the entire journey. So walk gently, notice carefully, and when pain keeps returning with every step, do not only curse the road, look within. There may be something ready to be seen, something ready to be understood, something ready, at last, to be removed. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. The monastery sat high on a mountain ridge, where clouds often drifted through the courtyards like wandering spirits. From a distance, the buildings appeared peaceful. White walls, dark wooden roofs, stone paths winding through gardens, pine trees swaying gently in the wind. Visitors who arrived there often imagined that everyone inside lived in perfect calm. They imagined monks moving through their days without frustration, without anger, without conflict. The reality was different. The monks were human. They practiced patience because patience was difficult. They practiced compassion because compassion did not always come naturally. They practiced mindfulness because the mind wandered constantly. No one understood this better than a young monk named Riku. Riku had entered the monastery at 17. He was sincere, dedicated, hard-working. He rose before dawn, studied diligently, meditated faithfully, completed every task assigned to him. Yet he possessed one great challenge: his temper. Anger seemed to find him everywhere. A monk spoke too loudly during meditation. Anger, a novice forgot instructions. Anger, rain interrupted plans. Anger, someone criticized his work. Anger. The feeling arrived quickly, like a spark landing in dry grass. Sometimes he managed to hide it. Sometimes he did not. But even when no one else noticed, he felt it burning inside. The emotion exhausted him. After each outburst came regret. After regret came shame. After shame came determination to do better. Then another irritation appeared, and the cycle repeated. For years, Riku believed the solution was simple. He needed to eliminate anger, destroy it, suppress it, force it away. The harder he tried, the stronger it seemed to become. One autumn morning, the monastery welcomed a new abbot. His name was Venerable Jinen. He was already old when he arrived. His beard was silver, his movements slow, his eyes calm. Many monks expected dramatic teachings, profound lectures, advanced meditation instructions. Instead, the abbot spent much of his time tending gardens, repairing roofs, and drinking tea. At first, some monks found this disappointing. Riku was among them. One afternoon, while carrying firewood, he watched Jinen carefully pruning a tree. The old monk, seemed completely absorbed in the task. After nearly an hour, curiosity overcame him. "Master," the abbot looked up. "Yes." "When will you begin teaching?" The old monk smiled. "I am teaching." Riku frowned. "By trimming branches?" "Among other things." The answer felt frustratingly vague. Several weeks later, Riku's temper created another problem. A younger novice accidentally spilled an entire bucket of water across a freshly cleaned floor. Riku had spent hours preparing the hall for an important ceremony. The moment he saw the water spreading across the floorboards, anger exploded. He shouted. The novice froze. His face turned pale. Several other monks stared. Silence filled the room. Immediately afterward, regret arrived. As always. That evening, the abbot requested a conversation. Riku bowed and entered the garden where Jinen sat beside a small bell. The bell hung from a wooden frame. It was old, simple, unremarkable. The abbot motioned for him to sit. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Jinen asked, "Why are you angry?" The question irritated Riku. "Because the novice was careless." The old monk nodded. "Perhaps." The young monk continued. "He wasted hours of work." "Perhaps." The abbot's calmness felt infuriating. Riku sighed heavily. "I don't know." Jinen smiled. "That is a better answer." The old monk pointed toward the bell. Then he gently struck it. A clear tone filled the garden. The sound lingered in the air, then gradually faded. Silence returned. "What caused the sound?" the abbot asked. "The strike." Jinen nodded. "Only the strike?" Riku looked confused. "What else would cause it?" The old monk smiled. "The bell." The answer seemed obvious, yet the abbot continued. "If there were no bell, could the strike create that sound?" "No." The old monk nodded. "The strike matters. The bell matters." Silence settled between them. Then Jinen asked, "When anger appears, what do you believe causes it?" Riku answered immediately, "Other people." The abbot laughed softly. "That is what most people believe." The conversation ended there, at least outwardly, but the question remained. The following days felt different. Whenever irritation appeared, Riku remembered the bell. Someone spoke during meditation. Anger, strike, and bell. A novice forgot instructions. Anger, strike, and bell. Rain interrupted outdoor work. Anger, strike, and bell. Gradually, he noticed something uncomfortable. The external events varied greatly, yet the emotional reaction often felt remarkably similar. Perhaps the events were not the entire explanation. Several weeks later, another lesson arrived. A merchant visited the monastery seeking guidance. The man complained constantly about competitors, taxes, weather, employees, family, everything. Nothing satisfied him. After the merchant departed, Riku asked, "How does anyone become that negative?" Jinen smiled, then pointed toward the bell. The young monk groaned. "Not the bell again." The old man laughed. "Especially the bell." Then he asked, "Did you notice something?" "What?" The merchant was angry long before any of today's problems appeared. Riku reflected carefully. The abbot was right. The man carried irritation everywhere, as though searching for excuses to release it. The realization felt familiar, uncomfortably familiar. Winter arrived. Snow covered the monastery grounds. The world became quieter. One evening, while clearing a path, Riku slipped on ice and fell hard. Pain shot through his leg. Instantly, anger erupted. Stupid ice, stupid weather, stupid path. Then he stopped. The reaction seemed absurd. The ice possessed no intention. The weather held no grudge. Yet anger appeared automatically. like a reflex. That night, he visited Jinen. "I think I understand something." The old monk looked interested. "What?" "Anger is already waiting." The abbot smiled. "Go on." "The world doesn't create all of it. The world triggers it." The old monk nodded, like striking the bell. For the first time, genuine excitement appeared in Riku's voice. The insight felt significant because it shifted responsibility, not blame, responsibility. If anger came entirely from the world, he was powerless. If anger involved the bell as well as the strike, transformation became possible. Years passed. Riku practiced diligently, not eliminating anger, observing it. This proved much harder and much more effective. One spring morning, a traveler insulted him publicly. The words stung. Anger appeared. Immediately, the old version of himself would have reacted, defended himself, argued, escalated. Instead, he paused. The anger remained, hot, unpleasant, powerful, but he observed it, like watching a storm move across the sky. For several breaths, he simply noticed. Then something remarkable happened. The emotion changed. Not because he forced it away, because he stopped feeding it. The experience fascinated him. He began studying anger the way a naturalist studies weather. What triggered it? What sustained it? What weakened it? Again and again, the same pattern emerged. Anger often arrived quickly, but it survived through stories. How dare they? This shouldn't happen. They always do this. I don't deserve this. The thoughts poured fuel onto the fire. Without the stories, the emotion often faded surprisingly fast. One afternoon, Jinen invited him for tea. The old abbot was becoming frailer. Age had slowed him considerably, yet his mind remained sharp. As they sat together, the abbot asked, "What have you learned?" Riku smiled. "Anger is noisy." The old monk laughed. "Yes." The younger monk continued, "And awareness is quiet." Jinen nodded approvingly. The lesson deepened further over the following years. Eventually, Riku became responsible for teaching younger monks. This proved challenging, very challenging. Novices made mistakes constantly. Instructions were forgotten. Tasks were performed incorrectly. Schedules were disrupted, the perfect environment for irritation. One morning, a young novice accidentally shattered a ceramic bowl that had belonged to the monastery for generations. The sound echoed through the hall. Every monk turned. The novice looked horrified. Riku felt anger rise immediately. Then something else appeared. Awareness. The space between emotion and action. A space he had spent years cultivating. The anger remained. But now he could choose. He looked at the frightened novice, then at the broken bowl. Finally, he smiled. "Are you injured?" The novice blinked. "What?" "Your hands." The boy looked down. "No." "Good." Relief flooded the room. The lesson spread quickly throughout the monastery. Not because Riku had become incapable of anger, because he had learned not to become its servant. Several years later, Abbot Jinen passed away peacefully. The monastery mourned deeply. His teachings had transformed countless lives. Yet many people struggled to explain exactly what made him extraordinary. He rarely delivered dramatic sermons, rarely offered complicated philosophy, rarely impressed visitors with displays of wisdom. Instead, he had taught through simple things: gardens, tea, snow, and a bell. After his death, the old bell remained hanging in the garden. Riku often visited it, especially during difficult moments. One summer evening, a visiting monk criticized the monastery harshly. The comments were unfair, dismissive, arrogant. Several younger monks became furious. Afterward, they approached Riku. "Why didn't you respond?" The older monk smiled, then led them to the bell. He struck it gently. The familiar tone spread through the air. "What do you hear?" The younger monks listened. "The bell." Riku nodded. The strike mattered. The bell mattered. The lesson continued. Some understood immediately. Others required years. Most people do. Late in life, Riku became abbot himself. Students frequently sought advice regarding anger. Many expected techniques, methods, strategies. Instead, he often began with a question. What happened before the anger? Most people described external events, insults, disappointments, obstacles. Then Riku would ask, and what happened inside? The second question changed everything, because anger rarely emerges from circumstances alone. It emerges from the meeting between circumstances and mind. The strike and the bell. One autumn evening, near the end of his life, Riku sat alone in the garden. The old bell still hung nearby. The monastery had changed over the decades. Buildings repaired, trees planted, students arriving and departing. The bell remained. A young novice approached. "Master." Riku smiled. "Yes?" The novice hesitated. "I get angry all the time." The old abbot laughed warmly. "So did I." The boy looked shocked. "You?" "For many years." The novice sat beside him. "How did you stop?" Riku looked toward the bell, then smiled. "I didn't." The boy frowned. "What?" "I stopped believing anger was the problem." Silence filled the garden. The novice waited. The old monk continued. "Unconscious anger causes suffering. Observed anger becomes a teacher." The wind moved softly through the trees. The bell swayed slightly. Not enough to ring, just enough to move. Riku watched it carefully, then spoke one final lesson. "When the bell rings, listen." The novice looked confused. The bell, the anger. Understanding would come later, as it often does, and perhaps that is the lesson. Most people believe peace comes from eliminating anger, but anger itself is not the enemy. It is a signal, a messenger, a bell. The real question is whether we hear it consciously or become lost inside its sound. The Buddha taught that emotions arise and pass according to causes and conditions. They are visitors, not masters, weather, not identity. The moment anger appears, awareness can appear too. The strike lands, the bell rings, then comes the choice. Will we become the sound, or will we listen to it? For the quiet bell teaches something profound. Every emotion has a voice, but wisdom begins the moment we stop shouting back long enough to hear what it is trying to tell us. And in that listening, transformation begins. Not through force, not through suppression, but through awareness, clear, patient, silent, like the mountain monastery beneath the clouds, and like the bell that rang faithfully for generations, teaching anyone willing to listen that even anger can become a doorway to awakening. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. The rain had been falling for 3 days. Not a violent storm, not the kind that uprooted trees or tore roofs from houses. Just a steady, relentless rain that seemed determined to soak every road, every field, and every traveler unfortunate enough to be walking beneath it. The mountain paths had become rivers of mud. Small streams overflowed their banks. Bridges disappeared beneath rushing water. Even the birds seemed quieter than usual. Along one of these muddy roads walked 2 monks. One was old, the other young. They'd spent several weeks visiting villages, offering teachings, helping the sick, and collecting food for their monastery. Now they were returning home. The older monk was named Ananda. His beard had turned silver years ago. His face carried the softness that often comes from decades of meditation and compassion. He walked slowly, not because he lacked strength, because he saw no reason to hurry. The younger monk was named Sota. He was sincere, dedicated, disciplined. He studied diligently, meditated faithfully, followed every rule with great care. Yet beneath his discipline lived a quiet pride. He believed that if one practiced correctly, life should become simple, predictable, ordered. Ananda often smiled when he noticed this. Experience had taught him that life rarely behaves according to our preferences. By late afternoon, the monks reached a swollen river crossing. Normally, the water barely reached their ankles. Today, it rushed waist-high, brown and turbulent. Branches floated downstream. The current moved with surprising force. Several travelers waited on the bank, uncertain whether to cross. Among them stood a young woman dressed in fine clothes. Her shoes were soaked. Mud stained the hem of her robe. She stared anxiously at the river. When she saw the monks approach, relief appeared on her face. She bowed respectfully. "Venerable sirs," she said, "I must reach the village on the other side before nightfall." The monks listened. "My mother is ill," she continued. "I have been called home." She looked toward the water. "But I cannot cross." Sota immediately understood the problem. Monks followed strict rules. Physical contact with women was forbidden. Surely they could offer advice, perhaps encouragement, but not assistance. The young monk prepared himself to explain this politely. Before he could speak, Ananda stepped forward. Without hesitation, the old monk bent slightly. "Climb onto my back." The young woman blinked. "What?" "I will carry you across." The travelers stared. Sota stared even harder. The woman hesitated only briefly. Then she climbed onto the old monk's back. Carefully, Ananda stepped into the river. The current pushed against his legs. The water swirled around him. Step by step, he crossed. When he reached the opposite bank, he gently lowered the woman to the ground. She bowed deeply. Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you." The old monk smiled. "Travel safely." Then he continued walking, as though nothing unusual had happened. Sota followed silently. At first, for nearly an hour, neither monk spoke. The rain continued falling softly. The road climbed through a forest of cedar trees. Birds called occasionally from the branches above. Yet inside Sota's mind, a storm had begun. How could Ananda do that? He knew the rules. He taught the rules. He expected others to respect the rules. Yet he had carried a woman on his back in front of everyone. The young monk tried to let the matter go. He failed. The more he thought about it, the more disturbed he became. Eventually, unable to remain silent, he spoke. "Master." Ananda looked up. "Yes?" "The woman." The old monk smiled. "What about her?" Sota frowned. "You carried her." "Yes." "Monks are not supposed to touch women." The old monk nodded. "That is generally true." The answer only increased Sota's frustration. "Then why did you do it?" Ananda walked quietly for several moments. Then he replied, "Because she needed help." Sota felt unsatisfied. The explanation seemed too simple. The road continued winding through the forest. Yet the young monk's thoughts refused to settle. Hours passed. The monastery eventually appeared in the distance. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the mountains. Still, Sota remained troubled. As they approached the gate, he finally stopped walking. "Master," Ananda turned. The young monk took a deep breath. "I still don't understand." The old monk waited patiently. Sota continued. "We have rules for a reason. Yes. We are supposed to avoid attachment. Yes. We are supposed to be careful. Yes. Then why carry her?" Ananda studied his student carefully. Then he asked, "How long ago did we cross the river?" Sota looked confused. "Several hours." The old monk nodded. "I carried her across the river." He smiled gently. "You have been carrying her ever since." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. For a moment, Sota could not respond. The old monk continued. "The woman needed help. I helped her. Then I put her down." The evening breeze moved through the trees. The monastery bell rang softly in the distance. Ananda looked directly at his student. "Why are you still carrying her?" Sota had no answer, because the question pointed towards something much larger than the river, something much larger than the woman. That night, sleep came slowly. The young monk lay awake listening to the sound of rain upon the roof. Again and again, he replayed the conversation. "Why are you still carrying her?" At first, he thought only about the river crossing. Then other memories began appearing. A harsh criticism from another monk, an embarrassing mistake made years earlier, a disagreement with a friend, an insult he had received during childhood. One by one, they surfaced, and suddenly he noticed something astonishing. He was carrying all of them, not physically, mentally, emotionally. The people involved had long since moved on. The events had ended years ago. Yet within his mind, they remained alive. The burdens continued because he continued carrying them. The realization was deeply uncomfortable. Over the following weeks, the lesson continued unfolding. One morning, while sweeping the monastery courtyard, Sota noticed another monk accidentally knock over a bucket of water. His immediate reaction was irritation, careless, inconsiderate, always making more work. Then he paused. The irritation remained, but now he could see it, like a burden asking to be picked up. For a moment he simply watched it, then returned to sweeping. The feeling faded, not instantly, but much faster than before. Several days later, another monk criticized one of his teachings. Normally, Sota would have replayed the conversation for days, perhaps weeks. Instead, he remembered the woman, the river, the burden. He listened, considered the feedback, accepted what was useful, released the rest. To his surprise, peace arrived much sooner. Months passed. One afternoon, Ananda invited Sota to accompany him into a nearby village. An elderly farmer had requested guidance. The man greeted them warmly, then immediately began complaining about his neighbors, the weather, his children, the government, his health, his past. For nearly an hour, grievances poured out. Ananda listened quietly, then asked a single question. "How many of these problems exist right now?" The farmer blinked. "What do you mean?" The old monk smiled. "Right this moment." The farmer thought carefully. Many complaints concerned things that had already happened. Others involved things that might happen. Only a few existed in the present. Sota watched the conversation with growing fascination, because he suddenly recognized the pattern. The farmer was carrying burdens, some decades old, some entirely imaginary. The body sat in the present. The mind dragged the past and future everywhere it went. Later, while walking home, Sota asked, "Do all people do this?" Ananda laughed. "Nearly all." The young monk smiled. Even monks? The old man laughed harder. Especially monks. Years passed. Ananda eventually grew very old. His hair turned white. His movements slowed, yet his calmness deepened. One autumn evening, while sitting beside a pond, Sota asked him, "Master, what is the hardest burden for people to release?" The old monk reflected carefully, then answered, "The image they have of themselves." Sota listened. Most people carry a story about who they are, who they were, who they should have been. The old monk picked up a fallen leaf. Sometimes the story becomes heavier than reality. The leaf drifted onto the water, and yet they continue carrying it. Many years later, after Ananda passed away, Sota became a respected teacher himself. Students often sought him out with problems. Some carried guilt, some carried resentment, some carried regret, others carried fear. One young monk arrived particularly distressed. Another student had insulted him months earlier. The wound remained fresh. Every day he replayed the conversation. Every day the anger returned. When he finished telling the story, Sota smiled gently, then asked, "How long ago did this happen?" 3 months. The teacher nodded. Then he said, "I think you have been carrying someone across a river." The young monk looked confused. Then slowly, very slowly, understanding appeared. The story continued spreading through generations. Students told it to other students. Parents shared it with children. Travelers carried it from village to village. Not because it was really about a woman, or a river, or even 2 monks. It was about something universal. The strange habit humans have of carrying things long after they are no longer needed. A criticism, a mistake, a betrayal, a disappointment, a fear, a memory. The event ends, yet we continue carrying it. The burden remains because we keep lifting it, again and again, day after day, year after year. The Buddha taught that suffering often persists, not because pain exists, but because attachment persists. We cling, we replay, we resist, we refuse to set things down. Yet freedom begins the moment we notice what we are carrying. Not every burden can be released immediately. Some require time, compassion, patience, but they can be released. One moment at a time, one step at a time. Just as the old monk carried the woman across the river, then put her down. The question is simple, but profound. What are you still carrying? And is it time to set it down? The village of Kawa rested beside a restless sea. The ocean shaped everything there. It determined when fishermen worked, when merchants traveled, when storms arrived, when prosperity came, and when hardship followed. The villagers respected the sea. Some feared it. Others loved it. Most learned the same lesson eventually. The sea could never be controlled. Among the fishermen lived a man named Daichi. Daichi was hard-working, intelligent, determined. Yet he possessed one habit that quietly troubled him. He wanted certainty, not possibility, not probability, certainty. He wanted the weather to behave predictably. He wanted fish to appear exactly where expected. He wanted people to keep promises. He wanted plans to unfold precisely as imagined. Whenever life refused to cooperate, frustration followed. And life refused to cooperate often. One spring morning, Daichi prepared his boat before sunrise. The sky looked clear, the wind gentle, the conditions perfect. He smiled. Finally, a day behaving exactly as planned. Several hours later, dark clouds appeared from nowhere. Strong winds followed, then heavy rain. The sea transformed from calm to violent. Daichi barely returned safely. When he reached shore, he cursed the weather. He cursed the clouds. He cursed the wind. He cursed his bad luck. An elderly fisherman named Sora happened to be repairing nets nearby. The old man listened quietly, then asked, "Did the storm hear you?" Daiichi frowned. "What?" "The storm," Sora smiled. "Did it change because you were angry?" The younger fisherman rolled his eyes. "Of course not." The old man nodded. "Interesting." Then he returned to repairing his nets. The answer irritated Daiichi, mostly because it contained truth. Over the following years, Daiichi became known as a skilled fisherman, yet he remained perpetually dissatisfied. When catches were small, he worried. When catches were large, he worried about maintaining them. When business was slow, he worried. When business improved, he worried about losing it. Every success created a new concern. Every solution produced another problem. His wife noticed. His friends noticed. Even strangers noticed. Only Daiichi failed to see it clearly. One evening, after an especially frustrating week, he sat beside the harbor watching waves strike the shore. Sora approached carrying 2 cups of tea. Without asking permission, the old fisherman sat beside him. For several minutes they watched the ocean. Finally, Sora asked, "What troubles you now?" Daiichi laughed bitterly. "Everything." The old man nodded. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." The waves crashed against rocks below. The younger fisherman sighed. The weather changes. The market changes. The fish move. People change. Nothing stays the way it should. Sora smiled. "There is your problem." Daiichi looked at him. "What?" "The way it should." The next morning, Sora invited Daiichi onto his boat. The old fisherman rarely took companions. Curiosity persuaded the younger man to accept. They sailed before dawn. The sea appeared calm, the sky clear, the air cool and pleasant. Several hours passed peacefully. Then the wind shifted. The boat began rocking more aggressively. Dark clouds gathered. A storm threatened. Daiichi immediately became anxious. "We should turn back." Sora continued adjusting his sail. "We may. The weather is changing." "Yes." "Aren't you worried?" The old fisherman smiled. "The weather has always changed." The answer felt ridiculous. Of course, weather changed. That wasn't the point. But Sora seemed unconcerned. Eventually he said, "Most suffering comes from arguing with reality." Daiichi stared. "What does that mean?" The old man pointed toward the wind. "Can you stop it?" "No." "Can you command it?" "No." "Can you negotiate with it?" "No." Sora nodded. "Then why spend so much energy wishing it were different?" The younger fisherman fell silent, because he realized he did exactly that, constantly. Several weeks later, another lesson arrived. Daiichi spent days preparing for an important fishing expedition. The conditions appeared perfect. The equipment was ready. The timing ideal. Everything aligned beautifully. Then, on the morning of departure, he became ill. A fever forced him to remain home. The opportunity vanished. He was furious. For days he complained. The unfairness, the bad timing, the wasted preparation. Then news arrived. The expedition encountered severe weather. Several boats were damaged. One nearly sank. The realization unsettled him. What appeared disastrous had protected him. The pattern felt familiar. A memory surfaced. A story Sora once told. A fisherman cannot see the entire ocean from one wave. Perhaps life worked similarly. Months passed. Daiichi slowly began noticing something. Reality caused difficulties, but resistance multiplied them. Rain was inconvenient. Complaining about rain created additional suffering. A delayed shipment was frustrating. Obsessing about the delay created more frustration. An argument hurt. Replaying it repeatedly hurt even more. The distinction seemed obvious once noticed, yet he had spent years missing it. One afternoon, he visited Sora. "I think I understand." The old fisherman smiled. "Wonderful. What?" Daiichi looked toward the sea. "I keep trying to catch the wind." The old man laughed, a deep, joyful laugh. "Exactly," the younger fisherman continued. "I keep trying to control things that cannot be controlled. The weather, the future, other people, the market, the sea." Sora nodded. "And how has that worked?" Daiichi laughed too. "Poorly." The old fisherman stood, then walked toward the shoreline. Daiichi followed. The tide was moving out. Small waves rolled gently across wet sand. Sora pointed toward a child standing near the water. The boy repeatedly tried to grab the reflection of the moon shimmering on the surface. Each time he reached, the reflection vanished, then reappeared elsewhere. The child became increasingly frustrated. "What is he doing?" Sora asked. "Trying to catch the reflection." The old man nodded. "And why is he failing?" "Because reflections cannot be held," Sora smiled. "Much like control." The lesson landed deeply. Some things can be influenced, prepared for, responded to, but not controlled. The difference mattered enormously. Years passed. Daiichi continued fishing. The storms continued. The market fluctuated. People changed. Plans succeeded. Plans failed. Life remained unpredictable, yet something within him became steadier. When difficulties appeared, he still felt disappointment. He was human, but he recovered faster, resisted less, adapted more. One winter, a violent storm destroyed part of the harbor. Many fishermen became overwhelmed. Repairs seemed impossible, the damage extensive. Several gathered to discuss what should happen. Voices rose, arguments followed. Blame spread quickly. Daiichi listened quietly. Then someone asked, "What do we do?" The younger version of himself would have focused on everything lost. Instead, he answered, "We repair the next board." The room fell silent. Then someone nodded. Another agreed. The work began, not all at once. One board, then another, then another. The harbor eventually recovered, just as life often does. Many years later, after Sora had passed away, young fishermen sought advice from Daiichi. One of them arrived particularly frustrated. "The sea never does what I want." Daiichi smiled. The statement sounded familiar, very familiar. He looked toward the waves, then answered, "Good." The young fisherman looked confused. "Good." Daiichi nodded. "If the sea obeyed every wish, it would teach nothing." The younger man frowned. "I don't understand." The old fisherman pointed toward the horizon. "The sea taught me something important." "What?" Daiichi smiled. "The difference between steering and controlling." The wind moved gently across the water. The lesson lingered, because it extended far beyond fishing. It applied to families, friendships, work, health, aging, nearly everything. We can steer, we can respond, we can prepare, we can choose our actions. But control, complete control, that is often an illusion, and chasing it creates endless exhaustion. Late in life, Daiichi sat alone beside the harbor watching the sunset. The sea remained as unpredictable as ever. Waves rolled toward shore. Clouds drifted overhead. Fishing boats moved across the horizon. The world continued changing, as it always would. For a while, he remembered the younger man he once was. Always planning, always worrying, always trying to force reality into obedience. The memory made him smile. Then he remembered Sora's words. Why spend so much energy wishing it were different? The wisdom seemed simple now, yet it had taken decades to understand. The Buddha often taught that suffering grows when we cling to things beyond our control. We demand permanence from what changes, certainty from what is uncertain, obedience from what is free. Life refuses, and conflict begins. The answer is not passivity. It is participation without attachment, steering the boat without demanding control of the sea, adjusting the sail without commanding the wind, responding wisely instead of resisting endlessly. And perhaps that is the lesson. Many people spend their lives trying to catch the wind, trying to control every outcome, every possibility, every uncertainty. The effort never succeeds. The wind remains free. The sea remains wild. The future remains unknown. Yet peace becomes possible the moment we stop trying to hold what cannot be held. When we learn to work with life instead of against it. When we stop catching the wind and start sailing with it. For the wise fisherman does not waste his life commanding the ocean. He learns how to navigate it. And that makes all the difference. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. Rain had fallen for 7 straight days. The roads leading into the village had become rivers of mud. Fields stood soaked beneath grey skies. The river overflowed its banks. Children remained indoors. Farmers watched the weather anxiously. And in the centre of the village, everything seemed covered by a thin layer of brown earth. Mud coated the streets. Mud covered shoes. Mud splashed against walls. Mud seemed to find its way into everything. Among the villagers lived a young man named Daigo. If someone had asked the villagers what they thought of him, most would have shrugged. Some would have frowned. A few might have laughed. Daigo was known for making mistakes. He arrived late, forgot responsibilities, started projects he never finished, spoke when he should have listened, made promises he sometimes failed to keep. Nothing terrible, nothing cruel. Yet over time, a reputation formed around him. People expected little, and eventually, Daigo expected little from himself as well. This was perhaps the saddest part. Not that others doubted him, that he had begun believing them. When people repeatedly tell you who you are, it becomes easy to forget that they may be wrong. One afternoon, while wandering through the village after another disappointing day, Daigo overheard 2 merchants talking. The conversation was not intended for him, yet he heard every word. "That boy?" The first merchant laughed. "He will never amount to much." The second nodded. "Some clay becomes pottery. Some remains mud." The men walked away. The words remained, for hours, for days, for weeks. Daigo tried to ignore them, but they settled deep inside him, like stones sinking into water. Some clay becomes pottery. Some remains mud. Perhaps they were right. The thought frightened him, because part of him already believed it. Several weeks later, news spread through the village. A wandering monk had arrived. His name was Master Kaito. He travelled alone, owned very little, spoke gently, and possessed a strange habit. Instead of giving long sermons, he spent most of his time talking with ordinary people, farmers, children, fishermen, merchants, widows, travellers, anyone, everyone. The villagers liked him immediately. His presence felt calm, like sitting beside a river. One afternoon, Daigo found himself sitting beneath a large tree where the monk often rested. Several villagers gathered nearby. As usual, people asked questions. One farmer asked about suffering. A merchant asked about anxiety. A young mother asked about fear. Eventually, an elderly woman raised her hand. "Master, why do some people seem naturally wise while others seem hopeless?" The question caught Daigo's attention immediately. The monk remained silent for several moments. Then he pointed toward the muddy road. "What do you see?" The villagers looked confused. "Mud." The monk nodded. Then he reached into his robe. From a small pouch, he removed a pearl. The object glowed softly in the afternoon light. Beautiful, pure, luminous. The villagers admired it. The monk smiled. Then, to everyone's shock, he dropped it directly into the mud. Several people gasped. The pearl disappeared instantly. The monk looked around. "What do you see now?" "Mud." The monk nodded. "And the pearl?" No one answered. The old teacher smiled. "Has it disappeared?" The villagers looked uncertain. Finally, a child spoke. "No." "Why not?" "Because it's still there." The monk's smile widened. "Exactly." The lesson intrigued Daigo, yet he did not fully understand it. Later that afternoon, after the crowd dispersed, he approached the monk privately. "What did the pearl mean?" Master Kaito looked towards him. "What do you think it meant?" Daigo sighed. "I don't know." The monk studied him carefully, then asked, "Do you think people are born as pearls or mud?" The question felt strange. Daigo shrugged. "Some people seem better than others." The teacher nodded. "Better at what?" The younger man hesitated. The answer seemed obvious at first, then less obvious. The monk smiled. A seed and a tree look very different, yet both contain the same life. The words lingered, though their meaning remained unclear. Over the following weeks, Daigo found himself returning to speak with the monk. Not because he sought enlightenment, because he enjoyed the conversations. The teacher rarely gave direct answers. Instead, he asked questions that followed him home, questions that appeared unexpectedly while working, questions that slowly changed how he viewed himself. One evening, Daigo confessed something. "I think something is wrong with me." The words emerged quietly, almost unwillingly. The monk listened patiently, then asked, "Who told you that?" The question surprised him. "No one." The monk waited. Daigo looked away, then sighed. "Many people." The teacher nodded. "And how many times have you repeated their words to yourself?" The silence answered for him. "Thousands, perhaps more." The realization felt uncomfortable, because he suddenly understood something. Many of the judgments hurting him no longer belonged to others. They belonged to him. He carried them, repeated them, protected them, fed them. The prison door stood open, yet he remained inside. One morning, the monk invited Daigo to accompany him on a walk. The path followed the river beyond the village. Recent rains had left much of the ground muddy. As they walked, they encountered a farmer attempting to pull a cart from deep mud. The wheels refused to move. The horse struggled. The farmer grew frustrated. Without hesitation, Master Kaito stepped forward to help. So did Daigo. Together they pushed, pulled, strained. Eventually, the cart broke free. The farmer thanked them repeatedly, then continued on his way. The monk smiled. The younger man smiled too. Helping felt surprisingly good. Several minutes later, the teacher asked, "What were you thinking while helping?" Daigo frowned. "What do you mean? Were you worrying about your reputation?" "No." "Were you thinking about your failures?" "No." "Were Were you comparing yourself to others? No. The monk nodded. You were simply helping. The lesson arrived gently. For a few moments, all his usual self-judgments disappeared. Not because they were solved, because they were absent. The experience mattered. As the months passed, small changes began appearing. Dago still made mistakes, still forgot things occasionally, still stumbled. But something important shifted. He stopped defining himself by those moments. The distinction changed everything. Failure became an event, not an identity. Mistakes became teachers, not permanent labels. Growth became possible, because he no longer assumed he was fundamentally broken. The pearl remained hidden, yet he had begun believing it existed. One autumn afternoon, a wealthy merchant visited the village. The man possessed fine clothing, expensive horses, numerous servants. His arrival attracted considerable attention. That evening, he attended one of Master Kaito's gatherings. During the discussion, the merchant asked, "Do you believe everyone possesses wisdom?" The monk nodded. "Yes." The merchant laughed. "Even fools?" The teacher smiled. "Especially them." The crowd laughed. The merchant frowned. The monk continued. "A pearl does not become mud because mud covers it." The lesson landed immediately. Not only for the merchant, for Dago too, because he realized how often people confuse appearance with essence, circumstance with identity, behavior with potential. The distinction mattered enormously. Winter arrived. Snow covered the village. The roads grew quiet. Life slowed. One evening, a serious problem emerged. A section of the riverbank collapsed after heavy weather. Several homes became threatened. The villagers organized emergency repairs. Everyone contributed. Farmers, merchants, carpenters. Children carried supplies. Elders prepared food. The entire community worked together, including Daigo. For 3 days, he labored tirelessly, moving stones, digging trenches, reinforcing the bank. When the danger finally passed, the village celebrated. Several people approached him, thanked him, praised his effort. The attention felt unfamiliar, yet something mattered more. For the first time, he respected himself. Not because others approved, because he had seen what he was capable of. The pearl felt slightly less hidden. Several weeks later, Master Kaito prepared to leave. The announcement saddened many villagers, especially Daigo. On the teacher's final evening, the young man approached him. "I don't want you to go." The monk smiled. "I was always going." The answer made him laugh despite himself. Then he grew serious. "What if I forget everything?" The old teacher shook his head gently. "You won't." "How can you know?" The monk looked toward the snowy road, then answered, "Because I didn't give you anything." The younger man frowned. "What do you mean?" The teacher's eyes softened. The pearl was already there. Silence filled the space between them. The lesson felt complete. Not finished, complete. There is a difference. Years passed. Daigo matured. The village changed. Children became adults. Adults became elders. Life unfolded as it always does. The young man who once believed he was worthless gradually became someone others respected. Not because he became perfect, he didn't. Not because he became famous, he didn't. Because he learned to see himself clearly. And people who see themselves clearly often become capable of seeing others clearly too. One spring morning, a young girl approached him. She looked upset, deeply upset. After listening carefully, he discovered the problem. Several children had mocked her. told her she wasn't smart, told her she wasn't talented, told her she wasn't good enough. The words sounded painfully familiar. For a moment, Daigo saw his younger self. Then he smiled and told her a story about a pearl hidden in the mud. Many years later, after Daigo's hair had turned grey, villagers often sought his advice. The irony never escaped him. The boy once considered hopeless had become someone others trusted. One evening, while sitting beside the river, he reflected on his life. The mistakes, the lessons, the growth, the people who helped him. Most of all, he remembered the pearl, not the object, the truth behind it, the truth that changed everything, the realization that worth and appearance are not the same. Potential and present circumstances are not the same. Essence and behavior are not the same. The understanding filled him with gratitude and compassion, because once you recognize the pearl within yourself, you begin seeing it everywhere. And perhaps that is the lesson. The Buddha taught that every being possesses the capacity for awakening. Not just monks, not just scholars, not just saints, everyone. This teaching is sometimes called Buddha nature. The pearl hidden in the mud reminds us that our deepest value is not destroyed by confusion, failure, fear, or ignorance. It may become hidden, covered, forgotten, but not destroyed. The world often labels people quickly: successful, failure, gifted, hopeless, wise, foolish. Yet these labels rarely tell the whole story. A pearl covered in mud remains a pearl. A seed beneath the soil remains a seed. Potential continues existing even when invisible. The task is not creating the pearl. The task is uncovering it through patience, practice, compassion, understanding, and perhaps most importantly, through refusing to believe every judgment that passes through our minds. For beneath the mud of fear, doubt, and conditioning lies something luminous, something whole, something that has been there from the beginning, waiting patiently, like a pearl beneath the surface, until the day we finally remember to look. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. Winter arrived early that year. The cold swept across the valley weeks before anyone expected it. Frost covered the fields. Streams slowed beneath thin layers of ice. The mountains disappeared behind grey clouds. Even the forest seemed quieter. The season touched every living thing. Animals searched more carefully for food. Farmers worried about crops. Travelers shortened their journeys. The long, bright days of summer felt very far away. Among the creatures living in the valley was a small bird named Luma. She was not remarkable by most standards. Her feathers were plain brown. Her wings were average. Her song was soft. If hundreds of birds gathered in the same tree, few would notice her. Yet Luma possessed something unusual. She continued singing in winter, not constantly, not loudly, but consistently. When snow covered the ground, she sang. When cold winds swept through the trees, she sang. When grey skies lingered for days, she sang. The habit puzzled many animals. Some admired it, others considered it foolish. One particularly cold morning, a crow named Raku landed beside her branch. The crow shook snow from his feathers, then looked at the little bird. "You still sing?" Luma smiled. "As often as I can." The crow glanced toward the frozen valley. "Why?" The bird tilted her head. "Why not?" Raku laughed. "Look around." The trees stood bare. The fields were frozen. The sky remained grey. "What exactly are you singing about?" Luma considered carefully, then answered, "Spring." The crow stared. "Spring is months away." "Yes. Then why sing about it now?" The little bird looked toward the horizon. "Because winter already knows about itself." The answer confused him, and because it confused him, he dismissed it. Many people do the same with wisdom. Not far from the forest lived a young woodcutter named Harrow. The previous year had been difficult, very difficult. His father had become ill. His family's income had shrunk. Several important plans had failed. The future looked uncertain. The weight of responsibility seemed to grow heavier every month. Harrow rarely complained, but inside, discouragement slowly accumulated. The winter only made things worse. Each day felt grey. Each task felt heavier. Each challenge felt larger. One morning, while gathering firewood near the forest, he heard a faint sound. At first, he assumed it was the wind. Then he realized it was singing. The song seemed strangely out of place. The valley looked frozen, silent. Yet somewhere nearby, a bird was singing. Curious, he followed the sound. Eventually, he found Luma perched on a branch. The little bird sang softly despite the cold. The sight irritated him, not because he disliked birds, because the song felt unrealistic. How could anything feel cheerful in weather like this? The young woodcutter shook his head, then returned to work, yet the sound stayed with him. Several days later, he heard the bird again, and again, and again. The song appeared every morning, always gentle, always present. Finally, curiosity overcame annoyance. He stopped beneath the tree. "You are persistent." The bird paused. "Thank you." The answer surprised him. It wasn't a compliment. Luma laughed softly. It sounded like one. The woodcutter crossed his arms. "Why are you singing?" The bird looked genuinely confused. "Because I can." Harrow frowned. "Nothing is good right now." The bird tilted her head. "Nothing?" The young man gestured broadly. "The cold, the snow, the shortages, the uncertainty, the problems." The bird listened patiently, then asked, "Are you alive?" The question annoyed him. "Obviously." "Then something is good." The answer felt simplistic, almost childish, yet it lingered long after he walked away. The weeks passed, winter deepened, snowstorms arrived, travel became difficult, food grew scarce in several villages. Many people became increasingly discouraged, including Harrow. One evening, while helping care for his father, the young man sat beside the fire feeling overwhelmed. The future looked impossible, the responsibilities endless, the uncertainty exhausting. His father noticed. The older man smiled weakly. "What troubles you?" Harrow sighed. "Everything." The answer sounded familiar. His father laughed softly. "It usually does at your age." The young man shook his head. "You don't understand." The older man smiled. "I probably understand more than you think." Silence settled between them. Then his father asked, "Have you heard the bird?" The question startled him. "The bird? The one singing every morning?" Harrow nodded reluctantly. His father smiled. "I like that bird." "Why?" The old man looked toward the dark window. "Because she remembers something." "What?" The answer came quietly. "Winter is not permanent." The sentence stayed with Harrow, not because it was profound, because it was true, and truth often possesses its own power. Winter is not permanent. The next morning, he listened carefully. The bird sang again. The valley remained frozen. Nothing external had changed. Yet the song sounded slightly different. Or perhaps he listened differently. Several weeks later, a severe storm struck the region, the strongest of the season. Wind howled through the trees, snow fell relentlessly. Many animals struggled, several became trapped, others disappeared entirely. When the storm finally ended, the forest looked transformed. Broken branches littered the ground. Drifts of snow covered familiar paths. The world appeared harsher than before. The following morning, Harrow walked through the aftermath. The silence felt enormous. For a moment, he wondered whether the little bird had survived. Then he heard it, faint, but unmistakable. The song. The sound emerged from a snow-covered pine tree. The bird remained, still singing. The realization affected him more deeply than expected, because hope sounds different after hardship. As winter continued, Harrow found himself visiting the tree more often. Not because the bird solved his problems. The problems remained. His father remained ill. The future remained uncertain. The work remained difficult. Yet the song reminded him of something important. Difficulty and hope can exist together. Most people assume hope appears only after hardship ends. The bird suggested otherwise. Hope often appears during hardship. Perhaps that is when it matters most. One afternoon, while repairing a fence, Harrow noticed an elderly traveller struggling along the road. The man looked exhausted, cold, hungry. Without thinking, Harrow invited him inside, shared food, offered warmth, provided a place to rest. The act felt small, ordinary. Yet afterward, he realized something. Several months earlier, he might not have done it. Discouragement had narrowed his world. The bird's song had slowly widened it again, not dramatically, gradually, like dawn. Eventually, the first signs of spring appeared. Tiny signs, easy to miss. A slightly warmer breeze, a patch of exposed earth, a bird returning from migration. The changes seemed insignificant, yet they mattered, because they confirmed what the little bird already knew. Winter is not permanent. One morning, while walking through the forest, Harrow noticed tiny green shoots emerging from beneath melting snow. The sight stopped him completely. For several minutes he simply stared. Life had been waiting, quietly, patiently, the entire time. The realization felt strangely emotional, not because of the plants, because he recognized the same truth inside himself. Hope had survived too. The weeks passed, spring strengthened, the valley transformed, ice melted, rivers flowed freely, trees awakened, flowers appeared, birdsong filled the air. The long winter finally released its grip. One morning, Harrow stood beneath the tree where he first heard Luma sing. The little bird remained there. The valley around them looked completely different. The young man smiled. "You were right." The bird tilted her head. "About what?" "Spring," Luma laughed. "I wasn't predicting it." The answer surprised him. "What do you mean?" The bird looked toward the green hills. Spring was always coming. The simplicity of the statement carried unexpected wisdom. The seasons had never forgotten their path. Only people did. Years passed. Harrow eventually became known as one of the most respected men in the valley. Not because life became easy. It did not. Challenges continued. Loss continued. Change continued. Yet he developed a reputation for steady optimism. Not blind optimism, not denial, something deeper, a confidence that difficult seasons eventually change. Whenever younger people asked how he remained hopeful, he often told them about the bird that sang during winter, Most listeners assumed the story was about positivity. It wasn't. It was about perspective. The bird never denied winter. She simply remembered spring. Both truths existed simultaneously. Late in life, Harrow climbed the same forest path one final time. His hair had turned grey, his movements had slowed. The tree still stood, though the original bird was long gone. Generations had passed since then, yet birds still sang there. The sound remained. As he listened, memories returned. The difficult winter, the uncertainty, the discouragement, the lesson. Winter is not permanent. The truth seemed even more meaningful now, because it applied to more than seasons. Grief is not permanent. Failure is not permanent. Fear is not permanent. Confusion is not permanent. Every experience changes. Every season moves. Every winter eventually yields. And perhaps that is the lesson. Hope is often misunderstood. Many people believe hope means pretending everything is fine. The bird teaches something different. The bird saw winter clearly, felt the cold, experienced the hardship, yet sang anyway. Not because winter wasn't real, because winter wasn't forever. The Buddha taught that all conditions are impermanent. Pleasant conditions, painful conditions, success, failure, joy, grief, everything changes. Hope grows from remembering this truth, not denying difficulty, understanding its temporary nature. The bird that sang in winter reminds us that darkness does not have the final word. The cold does not remain forever. The storm eventually passes. The snow eventually melts. And sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is continue singing before the spring arrives. Not after, before. Because hope is not proof that everything is easy. Hope is the quiet confidence that change is possible. And sometimes that confidence is enough to carry us through the longest winter until the first signs of spring appear once again. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. In a quiet monastery nestled among cedar-covered hills, there lived a young monk named Ren. The monastery was known throughout the region for its beautiful courtyard. At the center stood an ancient maple tree whose branches stretched wide above the stone paths. In spring, the tree produced tender green leaves. In summer, it provided cool shade. In autumn, its leaves turned brilliant shades of gold, orange, and crimson. Visitors often stopped simply to admire it, but every autumn, the tree created a problem. Its leaves fell constantly. Thousands upon thousands of leaves drifted from the branches. They covered the walkways. They filled the corners of the courtyard. They gathered around the temple steps. No matter how often the monks swept, new leaves would appear. The task seemed endless. Among the monastery residents, no one disliked this work more than Ren. Every morning before sunrise, he carried a broom into the courtyard. Every morning he swept piles of leaves into neat rows. And every morning before he even finished, more leaves floated down from above. The sight frustrated him. "It never ends," he often muttered. By midday, leaves returned. By evening, even more arrived. The next day, the process began again. To Ren, the work seemed pointless. He dreamed of more important responsibilities. He wanted to study profound teachings. He wanted to meditate for long hours. He wanted to discuss enlightenment with wise masters. Instead, he spent his mornings sweeping leaves. One chilly autumn day, Ren's frustration finally reached its limit. As he swept yet another pile of leaves, A gust of wind scattered them across the courtyard. The neat pile disappeared instantly. Leaves danced through the air. Some landed exactly where he had started. Ren slammed the broom against the ground. "This is ridiculous." An elderly monk named Jikan happened to be walking nearby. He stopped and watched quietly. "What troubles you?" he asked. Ren sighed. "The leaves." Jikan looked around. "They seem harmless enough. Not the leaves themselves. The sweeping." The old monk nodded. "Tell me more." Ren gladly did. For several minutes he described his frustration. The work felt repetitive. The results never lasted. Nothing was ever truly completed. Every accomplishment disappeared almost immediately. When he finished, Jikan remained silent. Then he asked a simple question. "When you sweep, where is your mind?" Ren frowned. "What do you mean?" "While your hands hold the broom, where does your attention go?" The young monk thought for a moment. "I think about other things, such as the future, my studies, what I would rather be doing." The old monk smiled gently. "I see." That was all he said. Then he continued walking. Ren stared after him. The answer felt unsatisfying. In fact, it barely seemed like an answer at all. The following morning, Ren returned to the courtyard. The leaves had fallen heavily overnight. Golden and red leaves covered nearly every stone. He picked up his broom with a sigh. Then he remembered Jikan's question. "When you sweep, where is your mind?" Curious, he decided to experiment. Instead of thinking about tomorrow, he focused on the broom. He noticed the sound of the bristles brushing across stone, the soft scraping rhythm, the texture of the wooden handle beneath his hands, the movement of leaves gathering together. For a few moments, he paid attention only to sweeping. Then his mind wandered again. He started thinking about breakfast. A few moments later, he remembered. He returned to the broom. Then his thoughts drifted toward future responsibilities. Again he returned. Then he remembered a conversation from the previous day. Again he returned. The pattern repeated constantly. Attention, distraction, attention, distraction. At first, he found this annoying. But slowly something changed. The work felt slightly less burdensome. The leaves remained the same. The broom remained the same. Yet the experience felt different. Several days later, Ren sought out Jikan. "I tried your suggestion." The old monk smiled. "And?" "It helped." "A little." Jikan nodded. "A little is enough." The young monk sat beside him. "But I still don't understand." The old monk waited patiently. "If sweeping leaves can be mindfulness practice, then what can't be?" Jikan's eyes brightened. "Excellent question." The old monk looked toward the courtyard. Then he said, "That is exactly the right question." Over the following weeks, Jikan began teaching Ren in unusual ways. One day he asked him to wash bowls. Another day he asked him to carry water. Another day he asked him to weed the garden. Each task seemed ordinary, yet after every activity, Jikan asked the same thing. "Were you present?" "Not." "Did you finish quickly?" "Not." "Did you perform perfectly?" "Not." "Did you impress anyone?" "Only." "Were you present?" At first, Ren struggled. His mind constantly wandered. While washing bowls, he thought about sweeping. While sweeping, he thought about eating. While eating, he thought about studying. While studying, he thought about sleeping. It seemed he was always somewhere other than where he actually was. One evening, Jikan invited him for tea. The two sat together overlooking the courtyard. Autumn leaves drifted gently through the air. The old monk poured tea. Then he asked, "Where do you think life happens?" Ren looked confused. "What do you mean? The past? No. The future? No." The monk smiled. "Then where?" "The present." "Exactly." Jikan lifted his cup. "Yet most people spend their lives everywhere except there." The words lingered in Ren's mind. That night, he thought about them for a long time. The next morning he rose before dawn. The courtyard was silent. A thin layer of mist floated above the ground. Leaves covered the stone paths once again. Ren picked up his broom. Then something unexpected happened. For the first time, he stopped viewing the leaves as a problem. Instead, he simply noticed them. The colors, the shapes, the gentle way they rested upon the earth, the sound they made when gathered together, the cool air against his skin, the distant songs of waking birds, the slow brightening of the sky. Everything seemed unusually vivid. Nothing extraordinary had occurred. The leaves were still leaves. The broom was still a broom. Yet because he was actually present, the ordinary felt extraordinary. That morning passed quickly, not because he hurried, but because he was no longer fighting the moment. Weeks turned into months. Autumn eventually gave way to winter. The leaves disappeared. Snow arrived. Then spring followed. The maple tree grew new leaves once more. Ren continued practicing, not only while sweeping, while eating, while walking, while listening, while speaking, while breathing. He began discovering something remarkable. The quality of his attention changed the quality of his experience. When his mind raced ahead into the future, anxiety grew. When it wandered endlessly through the past, regret appeared. But when he returned to what was actually happening, a quiet peace emerged. Years passed. Ren matured into a respected monk. Visitors often came seeking profound wisdom. Many expected complicated answers. Instead, they frequently received simple ones. One afternoon, a wealthy merchant arrived. The man was exhausted. His business consumed every waking hour. His mind never rested. Even during meals, he worried about work. Even at home, he worried about finances. Even during sleep, his concerns followed him. "Master Ren," he said, "how can I find peace?" Ren looked toward the courtyard. The old maple tree still stood there. Its leaves once again covered the ground. Without speaking, Ren handed the merchant a broom. The man looked puzzled. "Should I sweep?" "Yes." The merchant reluctantly agreed. After several minutes, he returned. "The leaves are swept." Ren nodded. "Were you sweeping?" The merchant frowned. "Of course." "Were you?" The man thought carefully. Then he laughed. "No." "What were you doing?" "I was thinking about my business." Ren smiled. "Then perhaps the leaves were swept, but you never actually arrived." The merchant fell silent. For the first time, he understood. Months later, he returned. This time, his face appeared calmer. "What changed?" Ren asked. The merchant smiled. "I started sweeping." Ren raised an eyebrow. "The leaves?" "No. My life." The two laughed together. As the years continued, Ren often reflected on his time in the courtyard. He had once believed wisdom would arrive through dramatic experiences, through secret teachings, through extraordinary revelations. Instead, one of his greatest lessons came from a broom and a pile of leaves. He learned that enlightenment was not hidden somewhere far away. It was hidden inside ordinary moments that most people overlooked. Inside washing bowls, inside drinking tea, inside walking slowly, inside listening fully, inside sweeping leaves. One autumn evening, Long after Jikan had passed away, Ren stood alone beneath the maple tree. The courtyard was covered once again. Thousands of leaves surrounded him. A gentle breeze stirred the branches overhead. One leaf drifted down and landed softly at his feet. Ren smiled. Then he picked up his broom. Not because the courtyard needed to be perfect, not because the work would last forever, but because this moment was here, and this moment deserved his full attention. As he swept, the evening sunlight painted the leaves gold. The world seemed wonderfully simple, and perhaps that was the lesson all along. Life is not found in the moment we finally finish everything. Life is not waiting at the end of the path. Life is here, in this breath, this step, this conversation, this ordinary task. The leaves will always fall again. Problems will return. Work will never truly end. But peace does not come from finishing the world's endless tasks. Peace comes from being fully present while doing them. And so the old monk swept the leaves, one stroke at a time, one breath at a time, one moment at a time, exactly where life had always been. In a valley surrounded by mountains and crossed by winding rivers, there stood a village famous for its weavers. The people there created some of the finest cloth in the region. Their fabrics were known for their beauty, strength, and intricate patterns. Merchants traveled great distances to purchase them. Kings wore them, temples displayed them, families passed them down through generations. Among all the weavers in the village, none was more respected than an elderly woman named Hana. Her work was extraordinary. The colors seemed alive. The patterns appeared almost magical. Many visitors believed her skill came from decades of experience. Others thought she possessed some secret technique. Whenever people asked how she created such beautiful cloth, Hana would simply smile. Then she would say, "I pay attention to the threads." Most assumed she was speaking about weaving. In truth, she meant something else entirely. One spring, a young man named Sora arrived in the village hoping to become her apprentice. Sora was talented. His hands were quick. His eyes were sharp. He learned patterns faster than most students. Yet despite his ability, he often became frustrated. He wanted to master weaving immediately. He wanted perfect results. He wanted recognition. Most of all, he wanted success to arrive quickly. During his first months as an apprentice, he made constant mistakes. Threads tangled, patterns became uneven, colors clashed unexpectedly. Whenever this happened, Sora grew angry. He blamed poor materials, bad luck, distractions, anything except his own impatience. One afternoon, after unraveling several hours of work ruined by a mistake, he slammed his hands against the loom. "This is pointless." Hana looked up from her weaving. "What is?" "All of it." The elderly woman waited. "The pattern keeps falling apart." She nodded. "And why do you think that is?" "Because one thread was wrong." Hana smiled. "Only one?" Sora frowned. "What do you mean?" The old woman motioned him closer. Together they examined the cloth. At first glance, the mistake seemed small. A single thread crossed where it should not have. Yet as Hana pointed further into the pattern, Sora noticed something surprising. The error had affected many other sections. One misplaced thread had gradually altered everything around it. The pattern remained recognizable, yet subtle distortions spread throughout the cloth. Hana traced the design gently with her finger. "Nothing stands alone." The words seemed simple, yet she spoke them with unusual seriousness. That evening, Sora thought about the lesson. a single thread influencing an entire design. The idea lingered. Days later, he joined several villagers repairing a bridge damaged by winter storms. The work required many people: carpenters, farmers, laborers. Even children carried supplies. At one point, Sora watched an elderly man carefully hammer a single wooden peg into place. The task seemed insignificant compared to the rest of the bridge. Yet later, he learned that without the peg, an entire support beam would have failed. Again, he remembered Hana's words: "Nothing stands alone." Several weeks afterward, another lesson arrived. A drought affected nearby villages. Water became scarce. Tension grew. People worried about crops. Families worried about survival. One afternoon, a neighboring village sent representatives requesting assistance. Many villagers hesitated. Resources were limited. Fear encouraged caution. Yet Hana immediately supported helping. Later, Sora asked why. "If we share our supplies, won't we have less?" The old woman smiled. Then she handed him a piece of unfinished cloth. "What do you see?" "A pattern. And if I remove half the threads?" "The pattern falls apart." "Exactly." She looked toward the neighboring village. "The same is true of people." Sora listened carefully. We imagine ourselves separate. We imagine our lives belong only to us. We imagine our actions affect only ourselves. The old woman shook her head. But life is woven differently. The lesson puzzled him. Yet over time, its meaning slowly revealed itself. Months passed. Summer arrived. The drought worsened. The village shared what resources it could. At first, some people complained. Others worried. Yet something unexpected happened. When heavy rains finally returned, the neighboring villagers remembered the kindness they had received. Months later, when floods damaged parts of Sora's village, help arrived from every direction. Food, labor, materials, support. The generosity that had once flowed outward now flowed back, like a thread completing a pattern. One evening, while weaving beside Hana, Sora mentioned this observation. The old woman nodded. "The world is full of invisible threads." He looked up. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering immediately, Hana walked to a nearby window. The sun was setting. Golden light filled the room. The village below glowed warmly. Children played in the streets. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Dogs barked in the distance. The old woman pointed toward the scene. "Look carefully," Sora did. "What do you see?" "People." "What else?" "Houses, roads, animals." The old woman smiled. "Look deeper." He remained silent. Then she continued. "The farmer depends on the rain. The baker depends on the farmer. The merchant depends on the baker. The child depends on the parent. The parent depends on the community." Her voice remained soft, yet every word seemed important. The entire village exists because countless lives support one another. She turned back toward the loom. Like threads. For the first time, Sora began to glimpse what she meant. The realization deepened several years later. By then, he had become an accomplished weaver. People praised his work. Merchants sought his fabrics. His reputation spread beyond the valley. One autumn, a wealthy noble commissioned an enormous tapestry. It would be displayed in a palace. The project required months of effort. Sora devoted himself completely. Every detail mattered. Every thread was carefully chosen. Finally, after many months, the tapestry was completed. It was magnificent. Perhaps the finest work he had ever created. The noble was delighted. The payment was generous. Everyone celebrated. Yet that evening, while sitting alone beside the river, Sora felt strangely unsettled. The feeling surprised him. He had achieved exactly what he once desired: recognition, success, respect. Why then did it feel incomplete? The following morning, he visited Hannah. By now she was very old. Her hands moved more slowly. Her eyesight had weakened, yet her presence remained steady. After listening to his concerns, she asked, "Who helped create the tapestry?" Sora looked confused. "I did." The old woman raised an eyebrow. "Did you?" The question lingered. Then she began naming people: the shepherd who cared for sheep providing wool, the dyers who created colors, the carpenters who built looms, the merchants who transported materials, the teachers who shared knowledge, the farmers who grew food, allowing everyone else to work. One by one, the list expanded. Eventually, Sora realized something extraordinary. The tapestry was not truly his alone. His hands had woven it, but countless lives had made it possible. The realization humbled him. It also brought unexpected peace. For years, he had viewed life through the lens of individual achievement. Now he saw something larger. No success belongs entirely to one person. No failure belongs entirely to one person. Everything arises through countless causes and conditions, like threads woven together. Years continued passing. Eventually, Hannah died peacefully. The entire village mourned her passing. At her funeral, many people shared stories. Some remembered her kindness. Others remembered her wisdom. Others remembered her extraordinary craftsmanship. When it came time for Sora to speak, he stood quietly before the gathered crowd. Then he held up a piece of cloth Hannah had woven long ago. The pattern was simple, beautiful, timeless. For several moments he simply looked at it. Then he said, "She taught me that life is woven from invisible threads." The crowd listened. We often see only ourselves, our goals, our struggles, our achievements. He ran his fingers across the fabric. But every life touches countless others. Every act of kindness, every word, every choice. We are constantly weaving one another's lives. Silence settled over the gathering. The lesson felt especially clear in that moment. Years later, when Sora himself became an elder teacher, students often asked for the secret to Hannah's wisdom. Rather than giving long explanations, he usually brought them to the loom. There, he would hand them a single thread. Then he would ask, "What happens if I remove this?" Most students answered, "Very little." Then he would begin unraveling part of a pattern, slowly, patiently, until they saw the truth. One thread rarely remains only one thread. Everything connects, everything influences, everything participates, like rivers flowing into oceans, like roots beneath a forest, like stars within a night sky, like threads within a tapestry. And perhaps that is the lesson. We often imagine ourselves separate from one another, separate from nature, separate from the world, separate from life itself. Yet separation is often an illusion. Every breath depends on trees. Every meal depends on countless hands. Every friendship changes both people involved. Every kindness ripples outward. Every action becomes part of a larger design. We are all weavers, whether we realize it or not. Each thought, each word, each action, a thread. And together, through visible and invisible connections, we continuously weave the tapestry of the world. The question is not whether we are weaving. The question is what pattern we are helping create. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. Every evening, just before sunset, the Tanaka family gathered for dinner. It had been their tradition for as long as anyone could remember. No matter how busy the day became, everyone eventually found their way back to the table. The meals were rarely elaborate. Rice, vegetables, soup, occasionally fish, nothing extraordinary. Yet those evenings held a quiet importance. Stories were shared, problems were discussed, laughter appeared unexpectedly, even silence felt comfortable. For many years, one chair always belonged to Grandfather Kenji. He sat near the window overlooking the garden. From his place at the table, he could watch the seasons change. Spring blossoms, summer rain, autumn leaves, winter snow. The chair became so familiar that nobody imagined it empty. Some things seem permanent simply because we have known them for a long time. Grandfather Kenji was one of those things. He had always been there, offering advice when asked, offering advice when not asked, telling stories, making jokes, fixing broken tools, teaching grandchildren how to plant seeds and prune trees. His presence felt woven into daily life, like sunlight entering through a window, not always noticed, yet deeply missed when absent. As the years passed, however, age slowly began changing him. His steps became slower, his hands less steady, his eyesight weaker. The family noticed these changes but rarely spoke about them, partly out of respect, partly out of denial, partly because acknowledging change often makes it feel more real. Kenji himself seemed untroubled. When someone commented on his age, he simply smiled. Everything ripens. Then he would return to whatever task occupied him. One spring, shortly after the cherry blossoms began blooming, Kenji became ill. At first, nobody worried. He had recovered from illnesses before. Surely this would be the same. Days passed, then weeks. The illness lingered. Doctors visited. Medicines were prescribed. Hope rose and fell like waves. Some mornings seemed promising. Others did not. Eventually, everyone understood what no one wanted to say aloud. Kenji's life was nearing its end. The realization settled over the family like a heavy fog. Each person responded differently. His daughter cried often. His son immersed himself in work. The grandchildren avoided discussing it altogether. Only Kenji appeared calm. One afternoon, his oldest grandson, Akio, sat beside him in the garden. Neither spoke for several minutes. The cherry blossoms drifted through the air around them. Finally, Akio asked, "Are you afraid?" Kenji looked toward the trees. Then he smiled softly. "Sometimes." The answer surprised him. "You are?" "Of course." The old man chuckled. "Being calm doesn't mean never feeling fear." Akio nodded slowly. Then he asked, "How do you deal with it?" Kenji watched a blossom land upon the grass. "It helps to remember that everything I have ever loved has changed." The answer felt strange, perhaps even disappointing. Yet something about it lingered. Several weeks later, Grandfather Kenji passed away peacefully during the night. The family gathered, friends visited, ceremonies were held, stories were shared, tears flowed freely. The house felt different immediately, not because the furniture changed, not because the rooms changed, because one person was missing. And absence has a way of making itself visible, especially in familiar places. The most difficult part, surprisingly, was dinner. Every evening, the family continued gathering around the table. The meals remained similar. The conversations continued. Yet one chair stood empty. Everyone noticed it. Nobody mentioned it. At first, the empty chair felt unbearable. Each glance toward it reopened the wound. His daughter often looked away. His son focused on his plate. The grandchildren spoke less than before. The chair seemed to contain a silence larger than the room itself. One evening, several months after Kenji's passing, Akio remained at the table long after everyone else had left. The dishes had been cleared. The room was quiet. Only the empty chair remained. As he stared at it, an unexpected feeling arose. Not sadness. Not exactly. Confusion. Why did the chair still hurt so much? The funeral had ended months earlier. Life had continued. Yet the sight of that empty space continued affecting him deeply. The following morning, he visited a small temple outside the village. An elderly monk named Ryokan lived there. Many people sought his guidance during difficult times. Akio found him sweeping fallen leaves from a stone path. After bowing respectfully, he explained his struggle. The monk listened patiently. Then he asked, "What troubles you most?" "The chair." Ryokan smiled gently. "The chair?" Akio nodded. "It reminds me that he's gone." The monk leaned on his broom. Then he asked, "Would you rather the chair had never existed?" The question startled him. "Of course not." "Why not?" "Because it belonged to my grandfather." The old monk nodded. "And what made it meaningful?" Akio thought for a moment, then answered, "The fact that he sat there." Ryokan smiled. "Exactly." The monk resumed sweeping. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Ryokan said, "Sometimes we focus so much on what has ended that we forget what was given." The words lingered. Over the following weeks, Akio reflected on them often. Gradually, he noticed something. Whenever he looked at the chair, his attention immediately moved to absence. What was missing? What had been lost? What could never return? Yet the chair also represented something else. Years of shared meals, stories, laughter, lessons, love. The empty chair existed because it had once been occupied. The pain existed because the relationship had mattered. One evening, while sitting alone at the table, he remembered a particular story his grandfather used to tell. A farmer had once complained that autumn leaves fell from the trees. The farmer considered it wasteful, sad, unnecessary. A wise teacher had responded, "Would you prefer the tree never produced leaves at all?" At the time, the story seemed simple. Now it felt profound. The leaves fall precisely because they first appeared. Loss exists because love existed. The realization did not erase grief, but it changed its shape. Several months later, the family faced an unexpected decision. They were renovating part of the house. The dining room needed changes. Some suggested removing the empty chair entirely. Others wanted to store it elsewhere. The discussion became surprisingly emotional. Everyone seemed unsure. Finally, Akio spoke. "Leave it." The family looked at him. "Why?" his mother asked. He considered carefully before answering. "Because the chair is not empty." The room grew quiet. His mother wiped away tears, and somehow everyone understood. The chair no longer represented only absence. It represented presence too. A life shared, a place occupied, a love that remained visible even after death. Years passed. The family continued gathering for dinner. New grandchildren were born. Children grew older. The house changed. The garden changed. The world changed. The chair remained. Visitors occasionally asked about it. The family would smile, then tell stories. Stories about Kenji. Stories that might otherwise have faded. In this way, the chair continued serving a purpose, not as a monument to loss, but as a reminder of gratitude. One autumn evening, Many years later, Akio sat beside his young daughter during dinner. She had never met Kenji, yet she knew many stories about him. As they ate, she pointed toward the familiar chair. "Why does nobody sit there?" Akio smiled. Then he told her the story. The whole story. When he finished, she remained quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you still miss him?" Akio looked toward the chair. The answer came easily. "Every day." His daughter frowned slightly. "Doesn't that make you sad?" He considered the question. Then he answered, "Sometimes." He smiled softly, "But mostly it makes me grateful." The little girl seemed to think deeply about this. Then she nodded. Children often understand more than adults expect. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Akio remained at the table alone. Moonlight entered through the window. The garden outside shimmered softly. The empty chair stood where it always had. Yet it no longer felt empty. Not really, because absence and presence often exist together. A person may leave, yet their influence remains. Their words remain. Their kindness remains. Their lessons remain. Their love remains. The chair had never been about furniture. It had always been about memory, about gratitude, about recognizing that impermanence does not erase meaning. The Buddha taught that everything changes. Everything. Relationships, bodies, seasons, lives. Many people hear this teaching and focus only on sadness. But there is another side. Impermanence is also what makes every moment precious. If nothing changed, nothing would matter. If life lasted forever, we might never appreciate it. The cherry blossom is beautiful because it falls. A sunset is beautiful because it ends. A conversation is precious because it cannot be repeated exactly. And a chair becomes meaningful because someone once sat there. Perhaps that is the lesson. Every life eventually leaves an empty chair somewhere. At a table, in a garden, on a porch, beside a river. The empty chair will hurt for a while, maybe for a long while. That is natural. That is love. But with time, if we look carefully, we may discover something. The chair is not only a symbol of loss, it is also evidence of a gift. Evidence that someone was here, that they shared their life, that they left traces of kindness, wisdom, laughter, and love behind them. And when we see that clearly, the chair remains empty. Yet the heart feels a little fuller. For gratitude and grief are not enemies. Often they sit together at the same table. And sometimes, if we allow them, they teach us how to cherish what was given without demanding that it stay forever. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.